A single dad rushes forward at a crowded gala, grabbing a little boy just before he slips into the deep end. The crowd gasps. But then, something happens no one expected. The toddler, silent for months, wraps his arms around the stranger and whispers his very first words. It should have been the start of a miracle, but instead, it opens the door to dangerous secrets. A powerful man is hiding the truth about a child. A grieving mother is forced to choose between protecting her son or exposing lies that could destroy everything. And when the truth finally breaks, the entire community will be forced to take sides. So the question is, what happens when one heroic act unravels a web of silence, power, and betrayal? Before we get into the story, comment below where in the world you are watching from today. Sunlight sparkled off the hotel's pristine pool, casting dancing reflections across the faces of Sacramento's wealthiest donors. The late afternoon air hummed with classical music and the gentle murmur of conversation. Naomi Ellison stood tall in her cream silk dress, every inch the poised CEO as she worked the crowd with practiced grace. "We're so grateful for your continued support," she said, touching the arm of an elderly patron. Her smile was warm but didn't quite reach her eyes. These events drained her, though she'd never show it. Across the terrace, Caleb Hart adjusted his earpiece and scanned the crowd. His dark blue security uniform felt stiff in the California heat, but his military training kept him alert and focused. Something about the scene bothered him. The guest list was perfect, the weather ideal, yet his instincts buzzed with unease. Then he spotted what was wrong. A small figure in a tiny blue suit had wandered away from his nanny. 3-year-old Theo Ellison toddled near the pool's edge, fascinated by the glittering water. The wet tiles gleamed beneath his dress shoes. Caleb's heart jumped. He'd been briefed about the CEO's son, the little boy who hadn't spoken since losing his father, the child who needed extra watching. And right now, no one was watching him at all. "Ma'am," Caleb spoke quietly into his radio, "we have a situation near the west end of the pool." He began moving through the crowd, trying not to draw attention. The last thing the event needed was panic. But Theo was moving too, drawn to a floating flower just out of reach. His small shoes slipped on the wet tile. Time seemed to slow. Caleb saw the boy's arms windmill as he lost his balance. Without hesitation, he lunged forward, pushing past a startled server. His boots skidded on the tiles as he dove. Gasps rippled through the crowd. Camera phones raised. Naomi turned at the commotion, her face going slack with horror as she spotted her son teetering at the pool's edge. But Caleb was already there, his strong arms wrapped around Theo's tiny body just as the boy pitched forward. They splashed into the shallow end together, Caleb twisting to take the impact on his back, keeping Theo's head above water. For a moment, everything was chaos. Guests crowded around the pool. Security rushed forward. Naomi's heels clicked rapidly across the tile as she ran to them. Caleb stood in the waist-deep water, cradling Theo securely against his chest. The boy's suit was soaked, but he was safe. Instead of crying, Theo had his arms wrapped tightly around Caleb's neck, face pressed into his shoulder. "Oh my God, Theo!" Naomi reached for her son, her professional composure cracking. "Baby, are you okay?" But Theo didn't let go of Caleb. Instead, he turned his head slightly and did something that made the entire crowd fall silent. He whispered, "Thank you." The words were soft but clear. "Hero." Naomi's hand flew to her mouth. Tears sprang to her eyes. The gathered crowd held their breath. Then Theo spoke again, louder this time, his small fingers gripping Caleb's wet shirt. "Stay." The word rang out across the suddenly quiet terrace. A single word that broke months of silence. Cameras flashed frantically, capturing the moment as Naomi reached out to touch her son's back, her other hand steadying herself on Caleb's shoulder. "I've got him, ma'am," Caleb said softly, his voice steady despite his soaked uniform and the dozens of eyes watching them. "He's safe." Theo nodded against Caleb's neck and whispered again, "Stay." The pool water lapped gently around them as security began clearing space, directing the murmuring crowd back. But for that moment, time seemed suspended. a former Marine holding a no longer silent little boy, while his mother stood close enough to touch them both, her tears falling unnoticed into the rippling water. None of them knew it yet, but that single word, stay, would change all their lives forever. A collective gasp rippled through the crowd as Theo's words hung in the air. The classical music still played softly in the background, but no one seemed to notice it anymore. All eyes were fixed on the unlikely trio in the pool, the security guard, the little boy, and the CEO rushing toward them in her designer dress. "Did he just?" someone whispered. "He spoke," another voice confirmed. Naomi's hands trembled as she reached the pool's edge. Her son, who hadn't uttered a word since that terrible night 6 months ago, was talking. Actually talking. She blinked rapidly, trying to hold back tears that threatened to ruin her carefully applied makeup. "Ma'am, let me help you," Caleb said, wading carefully toward the pool steps with Theo still clinging to him. Water streamed from his dark blue uniform, but his grip on the child remained gentle and secure. Other security personnel hurried forward with towels. The hotel manager, a thin man with wire-rimmed glasses, appeared with a look of concern. "Mrs. Ellison, we can arrange for dry clothes immediately." "Thank you, James. But first—" Naomi held up a hand, her attention fixed on her son. Theo's face remained pressed against Caleb's shoulder, but his eyes were open now, watching everything. He looked alert, present, different from the withdrawn child he'd been for so long. "Theo, sweetheart?" Naomi kept her voice soft, fighting to maintain composure. "Can you come to Mommy?" Theo lifted his head slightly. "Stay with Hero," he whispered, tightening his grip on Caleb's shirt. The crowd pressed closer, straining to hear. Phones recorded the moment, but for once, Naomi didn't care about the publicity. Her son was speaking. Nothing else mattered. "He saved you from falling, didn't he?" Naomi smiled, reaching out to stroke Theo's wet hair. "Yes, he is a hero." Caleb shifted uncomfortably at the word. "Just doing my job, ma'am. Any of us would have—" "No," an older security guard interrupted. "None of us saw the boy in time. You did." Mrs. Worthington, one of the hospital's biggest donors, stepped forward. Her diamonds glittered as she dabbed at her eyes with a silk handkerchief. "It's a miracle," she declared. "That dear child hasn't spoken since. Well, since the accident. And now—" More murmurs of agreement swept through the gathering. The word miracle was repeated in hushed, reverent tones. A hotel staff member appeared with fresh towels and a small terry cloth robe for Theo. Naomi reached for it, but Theo shook his head. "Stay," he repeated firmly. Caleb looked apologetically at Naomi. "Maybe if we sit down somewhere he'll feel more comfortable letting go?" Naomi nodded, gesturing toward a cluster of cushioned chairs near the pool. As they moved, she noticed Caleb's practiced ease in handling her son. There was something about his calm presence that seemed to reassure Theo. "You're good with children," she observed as they settled into the chairs, Theo still refusing to leave Caleb's lap. "I was a Marine medic," Caleb explained quietly. "Worked with a lot of kids overseas. Sometimes the little ones just need to feel safe before they're ready to move forward." Something in his words struck Naomi deeply. Isn't that what all the therapists had been saying? That Theo needed to feel secure again before he could process his grief? Around them, the party was slowly returning to normal. The hotel manager had directed staff to refresh drinks and restart the music. Donors gathered in small groups, discussing the extraordinary event they'd just witnessed. Camera phones were finally being lowered. Theo's small hand patted Caleb's chest. "Brave," he said clearly, causing nearby conversations to halt again. "That's right, buddy," Caleb answered naturally. "You're being very brave right now." Naomi watched in amazement as her son's face lit up at the praise. It was the most expression she'd seen from him in months. An idea began forming in her mind, one that might seem impulsive, but somehow felt right. "Mr." She paused, realizing she didn't know his full name. "Hart, ma'am. Caleb Hart." "Mr. Hart, our foundation is launching a new children's therapy program next week at the Riverside Retreat Center. Theo is scheduled to participate." She straightened in her chair, shifting into what her board called her CEO mode. Would you consider taking a temporary position as his safety aide during the program? We could certainly use someone with your medical background, and…" She glanced at her son, still contentedly leaning against Caleb's chest. "Your way with children." Caleb looked surprised. "Ma'am, I'm just regular security staff here. I'm sure you have more qualified." "I've seen all I need to see," Naomi interrupted firmly. "My son hasn't spoken in 6 months, Mr. Hart. 6 months of silence, despite the best child psychologists in the state. Then you save him, and suddenly, he's talking." She leaned forward. "I don't believe in coincidences. Do you?" Before Caleb could respond, someone in the crowd started clapping. The applause spread quickly, swelling into a wave of approval. Donors beamed at what they saw as a touching moment of humanity amid their usual formal fundraising events. Mrs. Worthington's voice carried over the applause. "Oh, this is wonderful! Simply wonderful!" Theo raised his head at the sound, looking around with curious eyes. Then, to everyone's continuing amazement, he smiled. A small, shy smile, but the first anyone had seen since his father's death. "Stay?" he asked again, looking up at Caleb. Caleb met Naomi's gaze over Theo's head. She nodded encouragingly, her eyes bright with unshed tears of hope. "Yes, buddy," Caleb said softly. "If your mom wants me to, I'll stay." The applause grew louder, filling the terrace with its joyful sound. Naomi saw her event coordinator giving her a thumbs up. Donations were already spiking as emotion-touched patrons reached for their checkbooks. But for once, the CEO wasn't thinking about fundraising goals or board approval ratings. She was watching her son's face, seeing light return to his eyes, hearing his voice after so many months of silence. The applause washed over them like a blessing, carrying with it the first real hope she'd felt in a very long time. The gala's energy had shifted to a quieter buzz as evening settled in. Most guests had moved inside to the grand ballroom, leaving the pool area bathed in the soft glow of string lights. Caleb stood near the service entrance, watching the remaining staff clear away champagne glasses and appetizer plates. His radio crackled. "Hart, report to security office, now." Caleb's jaw tightened slightly. He'd been expecting this. With measured steps, he made his way through the hotel's back corridors, his polished shoes clicking against the marble floors. The security office was tucked away in a windowless room, illuminated by the blue glow of monitor screens. 2 men waited for him: Marcus Wheeler, the head of hotel security, and James Torres, his deputy. Wheeler sat behind his desk, his expression unreadable. Torres leaned against a filing cabinet, arms crossed. "Take a seat, Hart," Wheeler said, gesturing to a chair. Caleb remained standing. "I prefer to stand, sir." Wheeler's eyes narrowed. "Quite a show you put on out there. Pretty convenient timing, wouldn't you say?" "Sir? The CEO's kid just happens to fall when you're nearby. You just happen to make this dramatic rescue, and suddenly you've got yourself a cushy new job." Torres pushed off from the filing cabinet. "Makes a guy wonder." Caleb kept his voice steady, though he felt heat rising in his neck. "Are you suggesting I endangered a child for personal gain?" "We're just doing our job," Wheeler said, shuffling through some papers. "Background check shows military service, Marine Corps medic, honorable discharge. But then some scattered employment. Bit of a drifter, aren't you?" "I've worked security jobs while completing my EMT certification," Caleb said. "Nothing scattered about it." Torres moved closer. "Here's what I think. I think maybe you saw an opportunity. Rich widow, vulnerable kid. Perfect setup for a white knight routine." Caleb's hands clenched at his sides, but his voice remained calm. "That boy could have cracked his head open on that tile. Or drowned. I did what anyone would do." "Anyone?" Wheeler raised an eyebrow. "Or someone looking to get close to Ms. Reiber? Ellison and her fortune?" The accusation hung heavy in the air. Caleb felt his combat training kick in, the same steady breathing that had kept him focused under fire in war zones. "I understand you have concerns, but I won't stand here and let you question my integrity." "Your integrity?" Torres scoffed. "You're a temp guard who just talked his way into the CEO's inner circle. We have a responsibility to protect our clients." "Protect?" Caleb's voice took on an edge. "Where were you when Theo was near that pool? Did either of you notice him wandering away from the crowd?" Wheeler stood up, his chair scraping against the floor. "Watch yourself, Hart. You're already on thin ice." "No. You watch yourselves." A firm voice cut through the tension. All three men turned to find Naomi Ellison standing in the doorway, her elegant evening gown somehow making the small security office seem even more cramped. Her dark eyes blazed with controlled anger. "Miss Ellison?" Wheeler stammered. "We were just conducting a routine." "I heard everything," Naomi interrupted. "And I'm disgusted. Mr. Hart saved my son's life tonight. I saw it happen with my own eyes, as did dozens of witnesses." "Are you suggesting all of us were fooled by some elaborate con?" Torres shifted uncomfortably. "Ma'am, we have protocols." "Your protocols should have prevented my son from reaching that pool in the first place," Naomi said sharply. "Instead, Mr. Hart was the only one who noticed and acted, and now you're interrogating him like a criminal?" She stepped fully into the room, her presence commanding attention. "Let me be very clear. I trust Mr. Hart's character and judgment. My decision to hire him was based on what I witnessed personally, and it's not open for debate." Wheeler tried one last time. "Ms. Ellison, given your position, we need to be extra cautious about what exactly?" Naomi's voice was steel wrapped in silk. "About a decorated veteran with medical training? About someone who risked his own safety to protect my child? Or is there something else bothering you about Mr. Hart?" The implication was clear. Wheeler and Torres exchanged uncomfortable glances. "Mr. Hart will be starting his new position tomorrow," Naomi continued. "I expect you to provide him with all necessary credentials and access, and I expect this baseless investigation to end immediately. Are we clear?" "Yes, ma'am," Wheeler muttered. "Crystal clear," Torres added. Naomi turned to Caleb. "Mr. Hart, would you please escort me back to the ballroom? I believe we have some paperwork to finalize." Caleb nodded, following her out of the security office. As they walked down the corridor, neither spoke for a moment. Finally, Naomi broke the silence. "I apologize for that, Mr. Hart. You deserved better. Thank you for stepping in," Caleb said quietly. "But you?" The gala's festive atmosphere had mellowed into a comfortable hush. Most guests had migrated indoors, leaving the poolside area peaceful under the twinkling lights strung overhead. The water reflected the golden glow, rippling gently in the evening breeze. Rosa Martinez gathered Tomas's backpack, carefully tucking away the coloring books and crayons that had kept him occupied during the long event. Her son had been so patient, sitting quietly at one of the back tables while she helped serve appetizers and clear dishes. "Mijo, it's time to go home," Rosa said softly, smoothing down his unruly dark hair. "You did such a good job tonight." Tomas looked up at her with those big brown eyes that always melted her heart. "But Mama, can't we stay a little longer? I want to watch the fancy people dance." Rosa checked her watch. "Nearly 9 o'clock. It's past your bedtime already, my amor. We need to catch the bus." Just then, Gregory Dane swept past their table, his expensive suit perfectly pressed despite the long evening. He was deep in conversation with two board members, gesturing enthusiastically as he described some new initiative. "Remember what I told you about staying quiet when the important people are talking," Rosa whispered. But Tomas had already slipped from his chair. "Tomas, wait!" Rosa reached for him, but he was too quick. The boy darted between the scattered chairs and tables, making a beeline for Gregory. Rosa's heart thundered in her chest as she watched her son approach the powerful man who had no idea he was about to have his world upended by an 8-year-old's innocent words. "Excuse me," Tomas said, tugging on Gregory's sleeve. Gregory turned, his practiced smile faltering slightly, as he looked down at the small boy in his slightly too big dress shirt and clip-on tie. Recognition flickered in his eyes, quickly masked by his usual polished charm. "Well, hello there, young man," Gregory said smoothly. "Are you enjoying the party?" Rosa hurried over, her hands trembling as she reached for her son. "I'm so sorry, Mr. Dane. Tomas, we need to go." But Tomas had that determined look on his face, the one he got when he simply had to share something important. He tugged Gregory's sleeve again, more insistent this time. "I need to tell you something," Tomas said. "It's important," Gregory chuckled, though there was an edge to it now. "What could be so important at this hour, Rosa felt frozen in place, her worst fear materializing before her eyes. She'd tried so hard to protect Tomas from the truth, to shield him from the complicated adult world that had no place for innocent hearts like his. But somehow, he had pieced it together, perhaps from overheard conversations, or simply by asking the questions children so naturally ask. Naomi Ellison had emerged from the ballroom, pausing near the doorway to observe the scene unfolding by the pool. She stood just close enough to hear, her expression curious as she watched the unlikely trio, the powerful board chair, the nervous housekeeper, and the determined little boy. Tomas motioned for Gregory to bend down. Almost unconsciously, Gregory lowered himself to one knee, bringing himself to the boy's level. There was something in Tomas's earnest face that commanded attention, even from a man used to commanding others. Rosa wanted to scoop up her son and run, to protect the careful life she'd built for them both. But her feet wouldn't move, her throat was too dry to speak. All she could do was watch as 8 years of careful silence crumbled in an instant. Tomas leaned in close to Gregory's ear, his small hand still gripping the expensive suit sleeve. The string lights cast dancing shadows across their faces as he whispered the words that would change everything. "Mommy says you're my daddy." The effect was immediate. Gregory's face drained of color, his usual poise deserting him. He straightened up so quickly he nearly lost his balance, taking a step back as if Tomas's words had physically pushed him. That's absolutely ridiculous," Gregory stammered, his eyes darting around to see who might have heard. They landed on Naomi, who stood perfectly still, her expression unreadable as she processed what she'd just witnessed. Rosa finally found her voice, though it came out as barely more than a whisper. "Mr. Dane, please. I didn't tell him to—" But Gregory had already composed himself, his mask of authority sliding back into place. He straightened his tie, his spine stiffening as he looked down at Rosa with cold eyes. "I don't know what game you're playing," he said quietly, menace underlying his controlled tone. "But I suggest you get your son under control. This is neither the time nor the place for such inappropriate fantasies." Rosa felt the color drain from her face, her hands shaking as she reached for Tomas. The look of confusion and hurt on her son's face made her heart ache. He didn't understand why his simple truth had caused such a reaction, why the grown-ups were suddenly acting so strange. "Mama?" Tomas's voice wavered. "Did I say something wrong?" Rosa couldn't answer. She could only pull him close, trying to shield him from the tension crackling in the air. Her eyes met Gregory's for a brief moment, and she saw something there that terrified her. Not just anger or denial, but a calculated coldness that promised consequences. The SUV pulled into Naomi's circular driveway just after midnight. Moonlight silvered the mansion's white columns, casting long shadows across manicured lawns. Inside the vehicle, Theo had fallen asleep against Caleb's arm, his small chest rising and falling peacefully. "Home, sweet home," Naomi whispered, trying to shake off the tension from the gala. She glanced in the rearview mirror at Rosa and Tomas in the back seat. Rosa's face was drawn and pale, her hands fidgeting in her lap. Caleb gently scooped up Theo, careful not to wake him. "I've got him, Miss Ellison." "Please, call me Naomi," she said, leading the way to the front door. The house welcomed them with warm golden light from the entryway chandelier. "Mommy, I'm hungry," Tomas announced, rubbing his eyes. His bow tie hung loose around his neck, the formal clothes from the gala now wrinkled from the long evening. Rosa's hand smoothed her son's hair. "It's very late, mijo. We should go to our apartment." "Actually," Naomi said, "I could use some cocoa myself. Why don't we all wind down in the kitchen for a few minutes?" Her tone was gentle but left little room for Rosa to decline. The kitchen was Naomi's favorite room, all gleaming copper pots and warm cherry cabinets. While Rosa heated milk on the stovetop, Caleb settled Theo on the cushioned window seat. The little boy stirred, but didn't wake. "Look what I found," Caleb said softly, pulling a set of wooden blocks from his jacket pocket. He began stacking them carefully on the kitchen island. Tomas wandered over, eyes bright, despite the late hour. "Can I play too?" he whispered. "Of course, buddy. Let's build something awesome, but quiet, okay? Like ninjas." Caleb demonstrated stacking blocks with exaggerated stealth movements that made Tomas giggle. The rich scent of chocolate filled the kitchen as Rosa stirred the pot. Her movements were mechanical, her mind clearly elsewhere. When she reached for mugs in the cabinet, her hands trembled slightly. "Here, let me help," Naomi said, stepping close. She kept her voice low. "Rosa, we need to talk about what happened tonight." Rosa's shoulders stiffened. "Please, Miss Ellison, not now, not with the children." "Mommy, look!" Tomas called out. "We made a castle." The women turned to see an impressive block structure taking shape on the island. Caleb had shown Tomas how to create archways and towers. Even Theo had woken up and crawled over to watch, his eyes following each careful placement. "That's wonderful, Maijo," Rosa said, managing a smile. She poured cocoa into 4 mugs, adding extra marshmallows to Tomas's portion. They gathered around the island, the children absorbed in their architectural project while the adults sipped their drinks. Naomi noticed how Caleb kept Theo engaged without pushing, offering blocks, demonstrating techniques, but letting the boy set his own pace. When Theo actually reached for a block himself, Caleb's encouraging smile was genuine. "Block," Theo whispered, the word barely audible. It was only his second word of the night, but Caleb acted as if this was perfectly normal. "That's right, buddy. Where should we put it?" Theo pointed to a spot on top of the tower. His small fingers trembled as he carefully placed the block. "Perfect," Caleb said. "You've got steady hands just like a surgeon." The moment was peaceful, almost magical. But Naomi couldn't ignore the elephant in the room. Rosa hadn't touched her cocoa, and her eyes kept darting to the clock. "It's been a long night," Naomi said finally. "Caleb, would you mind helping Tomas build one last tower while I speak with Rosa in my study?" Understanding flickered in Caleb's eyes. "No problem. What do you say, guys? Should we make this last one extra tall?" As the boys clustered around the blocks, Naomi led Rosa down the hallway to her private study. Family photos lined the walls. Happier times with her late husband, Theo's first steps, holiday gatherings. She closed the door softly behind them. Rosa spoke first, her voice thick with emotion. "Miss Ellison, please. I know what you must think of me, but I beg you, don't say anything about what Tomas said. Mr. Dane. He has so much power. My job, my visa, Tomas's future." "Rosa, slow down." Naomi gestured to the leather armchairs by the window. "Sit with me, please." But Rosa remained standing, wringing her hands. "You don't understand. When I first started working here, Mr. Dane was different, kind. He made promises. But then, when I told him about the baby," she drew a shaky breath. "He made other promises then, about what would happen if I ever told anyone." Naomi felt her chest tighten with anger, but kept her voice steady. "What kind of promises, Rosa?" "That no one would believe me. That he would make sure I lost my job, my work permit. That Tomas and I would be sent back to Guatemala with nothing." Tears spilled down Rosa's cheeks. "I know it was wrong to keep silent. But Tomas, he is my whole world. I would do anything to protect him." "Of course you would," Naomi said softly. "Any mother would. Mr. Dane pays for Tomas's school, his medical care, all in cash, through his lawyer. He said it was better this way. No paper trail, no scandal." Rosa's shoulders slumped. "I thought I could live with it. But Tomas. He's getting older. He asks questions. Tonight, I never thought he would." "Children have a way of speaking truth," Naomi said, thinking of Theo's whispered words to Caleb. "Rosa, look at me. What Gregory did. Taking advantage of you, threatening you, Den." Morning sunlight streamed through the kitchen windows of Naomi's home, turning the granite countertops to gold. The aroma of fresh coffee and warm pancakes filled the air as Rosa moved gracefully between the stove and sink, humming softly to herself. Naomi sat at the breakfast nook, her tablet propped against a crystal vase filled with fresh flowers. Though she tried to focus on her emails, her attention kept drifting to Theo, who sat quietly coloring at the kitchen table. Caleb sat beside him, watching the boy's careful strokes with genuine interest. "That's a great elephant," Caleb said softly. "I like how you made his trunk curl up." Theo's crayon paused mid-stroke. He looked up at Caleb with those big brown eyes that seemed to hold so much behind them. The whole kitchen seemed to hold its breath. "Can I have juice?" Theo whispered. The crayon slipped from Naomi's fingers, clattering against her coffee cup. Rosa turned from the stove, spatula frozen in mid-flip. For months, they'd communicated with Theo through nods, gestures, and careful guesses. Now he'd spoken twice in less than 24 hours. "Of course you can, buddy," Caleb replied smoothly, as if this was the most natural thing in the world. He stood up and walked to the fridge. "Apple or orange?" Theo pointed to the orange juice, a small smile playing at the corners of his mouth. Naomi pressed her hand to her heart, watching as Caleb poured the juice into Theo's favorite cup, the blue one with planets and stars. Her eyes met Rosa's across the kitchen, and they shared a look of wonder. "Here you go," Caleb said, placing the cup carefully in front of Theo. "Would you like a straw?" Theo nodded, then added in that same soft voice, "Please." Rosa quickly wiped her eyes with the corner of her apron before turning back to the pancakes. Naomi couldn't blame her. She was fighting tears herself. "These pancakes smell amazing, Rosa," Caleb said, breaking the emotional tension in the room. "Is that cinnamon I smell?" "My mother's recipe," Rosa replied, her voice warm but carrying an undercurrent of strain. "A little cinnamon, a little vanilla. Tomas loves them on special mornings." At the mention of her son, Rosa's shoulders tensed slightly. She busied herself with arranging pancakes on plates, her movements more hurried now. "Where is Tomas this morning?" Caleb asked. "With his grandmother," Rosa answered quickly, too quickly. "She watches him sometimes when I need to start early." Naomi noticed how Rosa avoided everyone's eyes as she set the plates on the table. The events from last night hung heavy in the air, unspoken but impossible to ignore. Theo picked up his fork and took a small bite of pancake. "Good," he whispered, and Rosa's face lit up with pleasure, despite her obvious distress. "Thank you, Misiello," she said softly, running a gentle hand over his curls. Naomi watched as Caleb cut his pancakes into neat triangles, his movements deliberate and calm. She wondered how much he had picked up on the underlying currents of tension. His military training probably made him more observant than most. "I should get going soon," Caleb said, checking his watch. "I need to pick up some things from my place if I'm going to be helpful this week." "Of course," Naomi nodded. "Rosa can show you out when you're ready." Theo's head snapped up, worry crossing his face. Caleb seemed to sense it immediately. "Don't worry, buddy. I'll be back in a couple of hours. Maybe we can build that puzzle you showed me last night?" The worry eased from Theo's expression, and he returned to his pancakes. Naomi marveled at how naturally Caleb seemed to understand her son's needs. After breakfast, Rosa began clearing the plates while Naomi took a call in her home office. Caleb helped Theo wash his hands and set him up with fresh paper and crayons before gathering his things. Rosa walked him to the front door, her steps heavy. Outside, the morning sun had risen higher, casting shorter shadows across the manicured lawn. Caleb's truck sat in the circular drive, its navy paint gleaming. "Mr. Hart," Rosa said quietly as they reached the door, "please, call me Caleb." "Caleb," she amended, twisting her apron in her hands. "Thank you for being so good with Theo. It's been so long since." She trailed off, her eyes distant and troubled. "He's a great kid," Caleb replied simply. He paused at the top of the steps, noting the way Rosa seemed to be carrying the weight of the world on her shoulders. The strong woman who had been confidently cooking just moments ago now looked small and uncertain. Caleb walked to his truck, each step measured and purposeful. He could feel Rosa watching him from the doorway, could sense the heavy burden of secrets and fears she carried. As he opened his truck door, he made a silent promise to himself to stay close, to be vigilant. Something told him both Theo and Rosa might need an ally in the days to come. Rosa lingered in the doorway, her eyes haunted as she watched him drive away. The morning light caught the silver threads in her dark hair, but couldn't chase away the shadows in her expression. Naomi's heels clicked against the polished marble floor as she made her way to the boardroom. Morning sunlight streamed through tall windows, but the warmth didn't reach the cold feeling settling in her stomach. She smoothed her navy blazer, squared her shoulders, and pushed open the heavy wooden doors. 12 faces turned to look at her. Gregory Dane sat at the head of the long table, his silver hair catching the light, his smile practiced and pristine. The other board members filled the leather chairs on either side, their expressions ranging from concern to curiosity. "Naomi, please, join us." Gregory gestured to the empty chair beside him. "We were just discussing last night's incident." She took her seat, noting how Gregory's choice of words already shaped the narrative. "The successful fundraiser," she corrected firmly. "And young Theo's breakthrough." "Yes, well." Gregory's fingers drummed once on the table. "About that. We have some concerns about your hasty decision to hire this security guard. Mr. Hart," Naomi emphasized his name, "is a former Marine medic with an exemplary record. Be that as it may," Gregory leaned forward, his voice taking on a paternal tone that made Naomi's jaw clench. "Bringing an unknown man into your household, especially given your position—" "He's hardly unknown," Naomi interrupted. "His background check is spotless, his references excellent." Martha Chen, one of the newer board members, cleared her throat. "The optics of the situation are complicated, Naomi. A single mother, CEO of a major corporation, hiring a man she just met to help her traumatized son who finally spoke after months of silence." Naomi finished. "Those are the only optics that matter." Gregory's smile tightened. "We've looked into Mr. Hart's background. There are some concerns about his fitness for this role." "What concerns?" Naomi's voice was sharp. "He's been treated for PTSD," Gregory said, sliding a folder across the table. "Military service can leave deep scars. Is that really what you want around your vulnerable child?" Naomi felt heat rise in her cheeks. "You accessed his private medical records?" "We have a duty to protect this company's interests," Gregory said smoothly. "And you, of course?" "Mr. Hart's medical history is protected information," Naomi said, her voice level despite her anger. "The fact that he sought treatment shows responsibility and self-awareness. And need I remind everyone that he saved my son from serious injury last night?" "If that's what happened," Gregory murmured. Naomi's head snapped up. "Excuse me?" "The security footage is unclear," Gregory said. "Some have suggested the timing was rather convenient. A dramatic rescue, just as donations were slowing." "Are you implying," Naomi's voice was deadly quiet, "that I would put my son at risk for a publicity stunt?" The boardroom fell silent. Several members shifted uncomfortably in their seats. "Of course not," Gregory backpedaled slightly. "But, as board chair, I must consider all angles. This man's presence could be disruptive. The press is already asking questions." "Questions you seem eager to encourage," Naomi noted. She stood, placing both hands on the table. "Let me be clear. Caleb Hart stays. He has already done more for Theo's well-being in one night than months of expensive specialists." "Naomi," Gregory's tone held a warning. "Think carefully about—" "I have thought carefully," she cut him off. "About my son. About what's best for him. About who has earned trust and who has not." Her gaze met his, and something flickered in Gregory's eyes, recognition that her words carried double meaning. "The board has authority in matters affecting company stability," Gregory reminded her, his charm wearing thin. "The board has no authority over my personal staffing decisions," Naomi countered. "Mr. Hart's employment is not up for discussion." She gathered her papers, tucking them into her leather portfolio. "Now, if there are no other attempts to interfere with my parenting decisions, I have actual business matters to attend to." Gregory's smile returned, practiced and perfect, but his eyes had turned to ice. "Of course, we only want what's best for you and Theo." Naomi stood straight and tall, every inch the CEO. "Then we're in agreement. Caleb stays." The other board members watched this exchange like a tennis match, heads swiveling between their chair and their chief executive. Gregory's smile remained fixed, but something darker lurked beneath it now. A growing hostility he couldn't quite hide. "As you wish," he said softly. Meeting adjourned, The automatic doors of Murphy's Market swooshed open as Caleb guided his shopping cart inside, Theo perched securely in the child seat. The little boy's eyes darted around, taking in the colorful displays of fresh produce and the gentle hum of shoppers going about their errands. "All right, buddy," Caleb said softly, pulling out the grocery list Naomi had given him. "Let's see what we need for dinner tonight." Theo's small fingers gripped the cart handle, his usual silence comfortable between them. Over the past few days, Caleb had learned that the boy communicated plenty without words, a squeeze of his hand, a tilt of his head, the way his eyes lit up when something caught his interest. They were examining red apples in the produce section when a warm, familiar voice called out, "Well, if it isn't Caleb Hart!" Pastor Lila Gaines stood nearby, her silver hair neatly styled and a gentle smile on her face. She wore a simple floral dress and carried a small basket of vegetables. "Pastor Lila," Caleb greeted, his face brightening. "What brings you out today?" "Oh, just picking up a few things for Sunday supper," she said, then noticed Theo watching her curiously. "And who might this young gentleman be?" Caleb placed a protective hand on Theo's shoulder. "This is Theo Ellison. I'm helping out his mom for a while." He turned to the boy. "Theo, this is my friend Pastor Lila. She makes the best apple pie in town." Theo's eyes widened at the mention of pie, and he gave a small wave that made Pastor Lila chuckle warmly. "It's wonderful to meet you, Theo," she said, her voice gentle and grandmother-like. She reached into her purse and pulled out a small wrapped candy. "May I?" she asked Caleb first. At his nod, she offered it to Theo, who accepted it with careful fingers and a shy smile. "Thank you," he whispered, so quietly they almost missed it. Pastor Lila's eyes sparkled with delight at hearing his voice. "You're very welcome, dear one." She turned to Caleb. "You know, I was just thinking about my Sunday suppers. It's been too long since we've had new faces at the table." Caleb smiled, knowing where this was heading. Pastor Lila's Sunday suppers were legendary in their community, a time when people from all walks of life gathered around her large oak table to share food and fellowship. "Would you and Theo like to join us this Sunday?" she asked. And of course his mother would be more than welcome. The more, the merrier. Theo tugged on Caleb's sleeve, pointing to the candy and then to Pastor Lila with questioning eyes. "That's right, buddy. Pastor Lila makes lots of good things to eat," Caleb explained, then addressed the pastor. "That's very kind of you, but I'd need to check with Miss Ellison first." Of course. Pastor Lila nodded. "And please, invite that sweet Rosa and her boy Tomas too. I've seen them at the market sometimes. Such a polite young man." Caleb felt a slight tension in his shoulders at the mention of Rosa and Tomas, knowing the complicated situation brewing beneath the surface. But Pastor Lila's table had always been a place of acceptance and healing. "I'll pass along the invitation," he promised. Later that evening, after putting away the groceries in Naomi's kitchen, Caleb found her in her home office, reviewing documents. She looked up when he knocked on the doorframe. "How was shopping?" she asked, removing her reading glasses. "Good. Theo helped pick out the apples," Caleb said, leaning against the doorway. "We ran into someone I'd like you to meet, Pastor Lila Gaines. She invited us all to Sunday supper this weekend." Naomi's expression turned cautious. "All of us? You, Theo, Rosa, and Tomas?" Caleb confirmed. "It's nothing formal, just good food and good company. Pastor Lila's been hosting these suppers for years. It's like family." He watched as various emotions crossed Naomi's face. Interest, hesitation, and something that looked like longing. She glanced at a photo on her desk, one of her late husband holding a younger Theo. "I haven't been to church since," she trailed off, then straightened her shoulders. "It's not really about church, though, is it?" Caleb shook his head. "No. It's about community. About having a place where everyone can just be themselves for a while." Rosa appeared in the doorway with a fresh cup of tea for Naomi. She'd clearly overheard the conversation, and there was a hint of hope in her eyes. Naomi noticed it too. She took a slow sip of tea, then set the cup down carefully. "What do you think, Rosa? Would you and Tomas like to join us?" Rosa's hands twisted in her apron. If "If you think it would be all right, Miss Ellison?" "Please, call me Naomi," she said softly, then turned back to Caleb. "What time on Sunday?" 5 o'clock, he replied, relief evident in his voice. "Pastor Lila makes everything from scratch, and there's always enough for leftovers." Theo appeared then, clutching his favorite stuffed elephant. He padded over to Naomi's chair and climbed into her lap, showing her the wrapped candy Pastor Lila had given him. "Would you like to go have dinner with the nice lady who gave you this?" Naomi asked him. Theo nodded, then pointed to Caleb and made a gesture like he was eating. "That's right," Caleb smiled. "I'll be there too." "Well then," Naomi said, hugging Theo close. "I suppose we're all going to Sunday supper." The decision hung in the air like a promise, of connection, of possibility, of something new taking root. But beneath it all, unspoken concerns remained. Gregory's threats, Rosa's secret, the delicate balance they were all trying to maintain. Yet for now, in the warm light of Naomi's office, with Theo's weight solid and real in her arms, those worries could wait until morning. The little white church glowed in the Sunday morning sunlight, its simple steeple reaching toward a cloudless blue sky. Naomi hesitated at the entrance, her hand resting protectively on Theo's shoulder. The boy pressed closer to her leg, eyes wide at the unfamiliar setting. Caleb stood nearby, dressed in a crisp blue button-down shirt and khakis. "Pastor Lila's congregation is like family," he assured them quietly. "No pressure, just good people and great food." Rosa and Tomas arrived just then, the young boy clutching a covered dish that smelled of warm spices. "My mother's enchilada recipe," Rosa explained with a shy smile. As they entered the sanctuary, sunlight streamed through stained glass windows, casting rainbow patterns across worn wooden pews. Several elderly ladies turned to smile and wave. A young mother with twin toddlers gave them an understanding nod. Pastor Lila, wearing simple robes and a warm smile, approached them. "Welcome, welcome! We're so glad you could join us today." She knelt to Theo's eye level. "Hello there, young man. Would you like to sit where you can see the children's choir?" Theo didn't respond verbally, but his grip on Naomi's hand loosened slightly. They found seats near the middle, where Theo could watch a group of children in white robes practicing their songs. The familiar hymns filled the space with gentle harmony. Throughout the service, Naomi found herself relaxing into the peaceful atmosphere. No one stared or whispered about the CEO in their midst. When it came time for prayer, Pastor Lila's voice carried through the quiet sanctuary. "Lord, we thank you for bringing new friends to our family today." To everyone's surprise, Theo's small voice whispered, "Amen," at the prayer's end. Caleb gave him a gentle smile, and the boy actually smiled back. After the service, the congregation moved to the church basement where long tables groaned under the weight of homemade dishes. The aroma of fried chicken, fresh rolls, and countless casseroles filled the air. Elderly deacons chatted with young families. Teenagers helped small children reach the punch bowl, and laughter echoed off the walls. "This is," Naomi paused, watching Theo accept a cookie from a grandmotherly woman with silver hair. "Different from what I expected." "Good different?" Caleb asked, filling a plate with potato salad and Rosa's enchiladas. "Very good," Naomi admitted. "I forgot places like this existed, where people just care about each other." They found seats at a table near the corner, where Theo could have some space if he needed it. But the boy seemed content, especially when the children's choir director invited him to help hand out song sheets for the afternoon singing. Rosa joined them, watching Tomas play a careful game of tag with other children his age. Her face held a mixture of joy and something deeper, more painful. When the children moved to another room for Sunday school activities, she turned to Naomi with eyes that held unshed tears. "I need to tell you something," Rosa said softly, pushing her dessert plate with its half-eaten cobbler aside. "About Gregory. About before." Naomi set down her fork, giving Rosa her full attention. The busy chatter of the church basement provided privacy in its own way. "He wasn't always." Rosa's fingers twisted in her napkin. "When I first started working at the hotel, he was kind. He noticed when I stayed late to help with special events. He asked about my dreams, my family back home." She took a shaky breath. "He helped me apply for better positions, recommended me for training programs." Naomi listened, her heart aching as she began to understand. Then when I told him about, Rosa glanced toward the direction Tomas had gone. He changed, said his reputation couldn't handle complications. He had his lawyer bring papers, made arrangements through the hotel's HR department to move me to a different position. Her voice dropped even lower. He said if I ever told anyone, he would make sure I lost everything I'd worked for. Naomi reached across the table, covering Rosa's trembling hands with her own. Around them, the warmth and joy of the church gathering continued, a stark contrast to the pain being shared in their quiet corner. "I was so afraid," Rosa whispered. "For years I've been afraid. But seeing you stand up to him at the gala, seeing how you protected Caleb from those security guards." She straightened her shoulders slightly. "Maybe it's time to stop being afraid." Before Naomi could respond, they heard Theo's laugh. A real laugh, floating from the next room where Caleb was apparently leading the children in some kind of game. The sound seemed to underscore everything. The possibility of healing, the importance of truth, the power of community. The two women sat in understanding silence, the half-eaten cobbler between them forgotten, while the sounds of hymn singing began to fill the basement once again. In that moment, surrounded by the genuine warmth of people who cared for each other simply because it was the right thing to do, both Naomi and Rosa felt something shift, as if the very air had changed, making room for hope to grow. Sunlight danced on the river's surface behind the church, where a gentle slope led down to a grassy bank. After the service and initial hellos, Caleb had suggested some fresh air might help Theo feel more at ease. Now, they sat cross-legged on a worn picnic blanket, the late morning warmth wrapping around them like a comfortable embrace. Theo fidgeted, his small fingers playing with blades of grass. The unfamiliar surroundings and new faces had left him tense, despite the congregation's gentle welcome. Caleb noticed the boy's shallow breathing, and remembered similar moments from his own struggles after returning from deployment. "Hey, buddy," Caleb said softly, "want to learn a special trick? It's how soldiers stay brave when things feel scary." Theo looked up, curiosity flickering in his dark eyes. He nodded slightly, scooting closer to Caleb. "Okay, watch me first." Caleb held up his hand, showing 4 fingers. "We're going to count to 4 while we breathe in, like this." He demonstrated, taking a slow breath while counting. 1, 2, 3, 4. Theo watched intently, his own chest automatically rising to match Caleb's rhythm. "Now we hold it for 2 counts." Caleb continued, holding up 2 fingers. 1, 2. His voice was steady and warm. "Then we let it out for 4 counts, nice and slow." From her spot under a nearby oak tree, Naomi watched the scene unfold. She'd kept a protective distance, ready to step in if Theo showed any signs of distress. But something in Caleb's patient demeanor had worked magic with her son from the very beginning. "Your turn, buddy," Caleb encouraged. "Ready to try? In through your nose? Like you're smelling fresh cookies." Theo's lips twitched into a small smile at that. He straightened his back, trying to mirror Caleb's posture. "That's it. In we go. 1. Caleb began counting. Theo inhaled, his chest puffing up almost comically large. 2, 3, 4. They counted together, Caleb's deep voice mixing with Theo's whispered numbers. "Now, hold those cookies in your belly," Caleb said with a playful wink. 1, 2. A giggle escaped Theo's lips, but he managed to hold his breath. "And out through your mouth, like you're cooling off hot soup. 1, 2, 3, 4. Theo exhaled with a dramatic whoosh that sent a dandelion puff swirling into the air. His giggle grew stronger, bright and clear like a bell. Naomi's hand flew to her mouth, tears pricking at her eyes. That laugh, she hadn't heard it in so long, since before. "Again!" Theo exclaimed, bouncing slightly on the blanket. "Again, please." "You got it, soldier," Caleb grinned. "This time, let's pretend we're brave lions." He lifted his hands like paws, making Theo laugh harder. They continued their breathing game, each round bringing a new animal or character. Theo transformed from a mighty elephant to a sneaky ninja, his earlier nervousness forgotten in the simple joy of play and connection. During a pause between rounds, Caleb's dog tag slipped out from beneath his shirt, catching the sunlight. Theo's eyes locked onto the metal plates with fascination. "What's that?" he asked, pointing. Caleb touched the tags gently. "These are my special necklace from when I was a soldier. They tell other soldiers who I am and that I'm one of the good guys who helps people." Theo leaned forward, studying the stamped metal. "Like when you helped me?" "Exactly like that," Caleb nodded. "Would you like to hold them?" Theo nodded eagerly. Caleb carefully lifted the chain over his head and placed it in Theo's outstretched hands. The boy cradled the tags like they were precious treasure, running his fingers over the raised letters. Naomi moved closer now, drawn by the tender moment. She settled on the blanket beside them, her shoulder brushing against Caleb's. He smelled like fresh laundry and something woodsy, pine maybe. "These helped you be brave?" Theo asked, still examining the tags. "They reminded me that I was never alone," Caleb explained. "That I had a whole team of people who cared about me, just like you do." Theo yawned suddenly, the morning's excitement catching up with him. He listed sideways until his head rested against Caleb's knee, the dog tag still clutched in his small fist. "Looks like someone's ready for a little rest," Caleb said softly. Naomi reached to take the tags, but Theo mumbled sleepily, "Can I keep them? Just for nap?" Caleb met Naomi's eyes, seeking permission. She nodded, touched by her son's trust in this gentleman who had already given them so much. "Sure thing, buddy," Caleb whispered. "They'll keep you safe while you dream." Theo's breathing deepened into the rhythm they'd practiced, slow and steady. The metal tags glinted in his relaxed grip as he drifted off to sleep there by the peaceful river. The bright hallways of the Children's Therapy Center sparkled with cheerful artwork and rainbow-colored handprints. Theo walked between Naomi and Caleb, his small hand wrapped tightly in his mother's grip while occasionally glancing up at Caleb for reassurance. The morning sun streamed through large windows, creating warm patches on the pale blue carpet. "Remember our brave breaths?" Caleb asked softly, demonstrating by taking an exaggerated deep breath. Theo copied him, his chest rising and falling in time with Caleb's. Naomi smiled, touched by their easy connection. "That's perfect, sweetheart. Just like Coach Caleb showed you." As they approached the therapy room, the click of expensive shoes echoed down the hallway. Gregory Dane rounded the corner, his tailored suit as impeccable as his practiced smile. Naomi's shoulders tensed immediately. "What a lovely surprise," Gregory said, his voice smooth as polished marble. "I thought I'd stop by to see how our little champion is doing." He bent slightly at the waist, addressing Theo directly. "Ready for your big session today?" Theo pressed himself against Naomi's leg, turning his face away. Caleb shifted subtly, placing himself between Gregory and the boy. "This is unexpected," Naomi said, her tone professionally neutral despite the steel in her eyes. "The board doesn't typically monitor individual therapy sessions." Gregory straightened, adjusting his silk tie. "Oh, just showing proper concern. After all, the foundation does provide funding for this excellent facility." His gaze slid to Caleb. "And of course, we want to ensure everything is appropriate." Ms. Martinez, Theo's therapist, appeared in the doorway of her office. Her warm brown eyes took in the scene, and she quickly moved to diffuse the tension. "Good morning, everyone. Theo, I've got some new blocks today. Would you like to see them?" Theo nodded slightly, still pressed against his mother's leg. Naomi knelt down to his level. "Go ahead with Miss Martinez, baby. We'll be right here." "Brave breaths," Caleb reminded gently. Theo touched the dog tags that still hung around his neck, then carefully made his way to Ms. Martinez, who led him into the cheerfully decorated therapy room. Gregory watched the interaction with barely concealed disdain. "Quite attached to those military trinkets, isn't he? I do hope we're not encouraging any inappropriate dependencies." "Those trinkets help him feel safe," Naomi replied sharply, "which is exactly what these sessions are about." "Of course, of course." Gregory raised his hands in mock surrender. "I simply want to ensure we're following proper protocols. Speaking of which..." He pulled out his phone, scrolling through it with exaggerated concern. There seems to be some confusion about Mr. Hart's security clearance documentation. Caleb remained steady, his voice level. All my paperwork was submitted and approved last week, Mr. Dane. You can verify that with HR. Ah, but there are always details to double-check. Background checks, references. Gregory's smile didn't reach his eyes. We handle very sensitive matters here. Gregory, Naomi cut in, her patience wearing thin. If you have concerns, schedule a meeting through proper channels. This isn't the time or place. A man in a crisp charcoal suit appeared at the end of the hallway, carrying a leather briefcase. He gave Gregory a slight nod. Gregory checked his watch with theatrical precision. Oh my, is that the time? You're absolutely right, Naomi. We all have appointments to keep. He started walking toward the suited man but paused. Oh, and the board would appreciate an update on Theo's progress at next week's meeting. We do so want to support his recovery. The way he emphasized the last word made Naomi's jaw clench. She watched as Gregory approached the man in the charcoal suit, their heads bent close in quiet discussion. Caleb, standing slightly behind Naomi, noticed Gregory smoothly slip a thick envelope from his jacket into the lawyer's waiting briefcase. I need to check something with security, Caleb said quietly to Naomi. Will you be okay here? Naomi nodded, her eyes still fixed on Gregory's retreating form. We'll be fine. Theo's safe with Ms. Martinez. Through the therapy room's window, they could see Theo carefully stacking blocks, his face peaceful in concentration. Ms. Martinez sat cross-legged on the floor beside him, her gentle encouragement carrying faintly through the door. One more block, they heard her say. That's it, nice and steady. The simple scene, a child at play, trusted adults, keeping watch, stood in sharp contrast to the tension that had filled the hallway moments before. Naomi took a deep breath of her own, remembering Caleb's lessons about staying calm for Theo's sake. The sound of Gregory's laughter echoed from around the corner, followed by the soft ding of the elevator. Naomi squared her shoulders, drawing strength from the knowledge that her son was making progress, despite Gregory's attempts to undermine their stability. She settled into one of the comfortable waiting room chairs, her laptop ready for an hour of work while Theo had his session. Caleb moved toward the security desk, his trained eye tracking the direction Gregory and the lawyer had taken. The morning sun continued to stream through the windows, warming the children's artwork on the walls, bright pictures of hope and healing that seemed to glow in defiance of the shadows Gregory had tried to cast. The late afternoon sun cast long shadows through the therapy center's windows as Naomi and Caleb sat in the quiet waiting area. Theo was safely engaged in his session, giving them a rare moment to talk privately. Caleb leaned forward, his voice low and steady. There's something you need to know, he said, glancing around to ensure they were alone. I saw Gregory earlier, passing an envelope to some lawyer in a suit. Naomi's shoulders tensed. She pulled out her phone and opened her notes app. Tell me everything you saw. It was quick but deliberate. The man had a leather briefcase with Martinez Associates embossed on it. They didn't speak, just a nod, and Gregory slipped him a thick manila envelope. Naomi's fingers moved swiftly across her screen. What time exactly? 11:47 a.m. I remember checking my watch right after. She nodded, her CEO instincts kicking in. I've been keeping track of everything since that night at the gala. Times, dates, conversations. She showed him her phone, revealing meticulously organized notes. Rosa's been sharing bits and pieces too. Smart, Caleb said softly. Document everything. Naomi scrolled through her notes. Rosa told me Gregory used to visit their old apartment building regularly, about 9 years ago. The timing matches perfectly with. She paused, swallowing hard. With Tomas. Does she have any proof? Messages, cards, anything from back then? She kept everything. Naomi's voice dropped to barely above a whisper. Old texts, birthday cards to Tomas signed a friend, even receipts from money transfers. She was scared to delete anything, just in case. Caleb nodded grimly. Military taught me, always keep a paper trail. They sat in silence for a moment as a nurse walked past. When she was gone, Naomi continued. Rosa said Gregory was kind at first. Brought groceries, helped with rent. Then Tomas was born, and suddenly there were lawyers with paperwork, threats about her immigration status, even though she's completely legal. Classic intimidation tactics, Caleb said, his jaw tightening. Use people's fears against them. Naomi pulled up another note. Last week, Rosa found an envelope in her mailbox. Just a blank piece of paper with her old visa number written on it. No signature, but the message was clear. He's getting nervous, Caleb observed. People like Gregory, they're used to controlling the narrative. When that control slips, they lash out, Naomi finished. She locked her phone and slipped it back into her purse. I've seen it in the boardroom. The smile gets tighter. The friendly suggestions become thinly veiled threats. Caleb's expression softened as he watched her. You're taking a big risk, standing up to him. What choice do I have? Naomi's voice carried both determination and exhaustion. Rosa's been like family to us. Tomas and Theo are practically brothers. I can't just look the other way, while Gregory bullies them into silence. No, you can't, Caleb agreed. And you shouldn't have to. A comfortable silence fell between them. Through the therapy room's window, they could see Theo stacking blocks with his therapist, more animated than he'd been in months. I've been thinking, Caleb said carefully. With my security background, I could keep an extra eye on Rosa and Tomas. Nothing obvious, just making sure they're safe, especially during off hours. Naomi studied his face. You'd do that? Of course. His voice was firm but gentle. It's what's right. And honestly, those two have worked their way into my heart just like Theo has. Naomi's eyes welled up slightly, but she blinked the tears away. Thank you, Caleb. I don't know what we'd do without you. I've got a buddy who works security systems, Caleb added. We could quietly upgrade Rosa's home security. Cameras, better locks, the works. Do it, Naomi said without hesitation. I'll cover any costs. And Caleb, she touched his arm lightly. Be careful. Gregory has eyes everywhere. Don't worry about me, he assured her with a small smile. I learned a thing or two about staying under the radar in the Marines. Through the window, they watched as Theo successfully balanced the final block on his tower. His therapist clapped, and for the first time in what felt like forever, Theo smiled, really smiled. Look at that, Naomi whispered, her voice full of wonder. He's getting stronger every day, Caleb said, just like his mama. The therapy room door opened and Theo came running out, heading straight for Caleb. Did you see my tower? Sure did, buddy. Caleb caught him in a gentle hug. Those were some mighty fine building skills. Naomi watched them, her heart full despite the weight of their earlier conversation. Theo hadn't spoken this much in months, hadn't shown this much joy since before the accident. Whatever storms Gregory might bring their way, this moment, this healing, made it all worthwhile. Time for brave breaths? Theo asked hopefully. You bet, Caleb responded, settling into their familiar routine. In through the nose, like a soldier. As Caleb guided Theo through their breathing exercise, Naomi added another note to her phone. The date, the time, and a simple observation. Theo spoke unprompted, full sentences. Third time this week. She caught Caleb's eye over Theo's head, and they shared a look of quiet understanding. They would protect this little family they'd built, no matter what it took. As they gathered their things to leave, Caleb's posture shifted subtly, his trained eyes already scanning the hallway with heightened awareness. He would watch over them all, Theo, Naomi, Rosa, and Tomas. It wasn't just duty anymore, it was love. The aroma of fresh tortillas and simmering beans filled Rosa's modest apartment. Though small, the space radiated warmth and care. Cheerful curtains hung in the windows, and children's artwork decorated the refrigerator. Caleb sat at the weathered kitchen table, watching as Tomas carefully spread his drawings across its scratched surface. This is my family, Tomas explained, pointing to colorful stick figures. His small finger traced each shape with pride. Here's Mommy and me, and... He hesitated, glancing toward Rosa, who stood at the stove, her back stiffening slightly. Rosa stirred the pot with more force than necessary, the spoon clinking against the sides. Tomas, mi amor, perhaps Mr. Caleb doesn't want to see all your drawings right now. But mommy, this one's important. Tomas pulled out another paper from his folder. This one showing 3 figures holding hands. See? It's the man you said is my daddy. The spoon in Rosa's hand clattered into the pot. She quickly fished it out, her hands trembling slightly. Tomas, por favor, go wash up for dinner. But, now, mi amor. Tomas gathered his drawings slowly, shoulders slumped. As he shuffled past Caleb, the former Marine reached out and gently touched his arm. Hey buddy, maybe you can show me more after we eat, okay? The boy's face brightened slightly. Promise? Promise. Once Tomas disappeared down the hall, Rosa sagged against the counter. I'm so sorry, Mr. Hart. He doesn't understand. Rosa, Caleb said softly, you don't need to apologize. And please, call me Caleb. She nodded, wiping her hands on her apron. It's just complicated. Tomas? He asks questions. Normal questions about his father. Her voice dropped to barely a whisper. About Gregory. Caleb remained quiet, letting her speak at her own pace. His years as a medic had taught him the value of patient silence. I was younger then, Rosa continued, moving to set plates on the table. New to this country. Gregory Mr. Dane. He was kind at first. Helped me get papers, find work. Her hands shook as she arranged the silverware. When I told him about the baby, he changed. Said it would ruin everything. His reputation, his position. The sound of running water from the bathroom partially masked Tomas's cheerful singing. Rosa glanced toward the hall, then spoke more quickly. He arranged for me to work at the hotel, in housekeeping. Good benefits, steady pay. But I had to promise never to tell anyone. Never to ask for anything more. Caleb's jaw tightened, but he kept his voice gentle. And you've kept that promise all these years? Rosa nodded, tears gathering in her eyes. For Tomas. To keep him safe, give him a good life. But now, she gestured helplessly at the drawings. Children see truth so clearly, don't they? He knows something is missing. From the bathroom came the sound of splashing and more singing. Rosa quickly wiped her eyes. Mr. Hart, Caleb, please, you cannot tell anyone. Gregory, he has power. One word from him. I understand, Caleb assured her, though his heart ached at the fear in her voice. But Rosa, you and Tomas deserve better than living in fear. She managed a weak smile. Perhaps. But for now, we have dinner to eat. She called out. Tomas, ven a corner. The boy bounded back to the kitchen, face freshly scrubbed. Can we say grace-like at Pastor Lila's church? Rosa looked uncertainly at Caleb, who smiled. I'd be honored. They joined hands around the table, Tomas's small fingers warm and trusting in Caleb's larger ones. As they bowed their heads, Caleb noticed another drawing, partially hidden under Tomas's placemat, a figure in what looked like a security uniform, standing protectively near stick-figure versions of himself and his mother. The meal was delicious, filled with Tomas's chatter about school and his friends. But Caleb couldn't shake the weight of what he'd learned, or the sight of those innocent drawings that spoke such difficult truths. Later, driving home under a sky heavy with stars, Caleb gripped his steering wheel and prayed. For Rosa's courage, for Tomas's tender heart, for truth to finally break free from shadows. Most of all, he prayed for wisdom to help protect this small family caught in the web of a powerful man's secrets. The morning sun sparkled across the ocean as Naomi's SUV wound its way down the coastal road. In the back seat, Theo pressed his face against the window, his eyes wide at the endless blue horizon. Next to him, Tomas bounced with excitement, pointing out every seabird that soared past. Look, look, another one, Tomas exclaimed, his finger tracking a pelican's dive. Rosa smiled from the middle row, her normally tense shoulders relaxed for once. Yes, mi amor, that's a pelican fishing for his breakfast. Caleb sat in the passenger seat, sneaking glances at Naomi as she drove. The early light caught the soft curves of her face, and he noticed how she seemed lighter today, freer somehow. Away from the office and its pressures, she looked younger, more at peace. They pulled into the beach parking lot, the only car there this early. Naomi had chosen a quiet stretch of coast, away from the tourist spots. As soon as she cut the engine, the kids were scrambling to get out. "Wait for us," Caleb called, his voice carrying that gentle authority that always seemed to work with Theo. Both boys paused, fidgeting but obedient. They unloaded the car together, chairs, umbrellas, coolers, and the all-important bucket and shovel set that Tomas had insisted on bringing. The morning air was cool, but the sun promised warmth later. "Remember, stay where we can see you," Rosa reminded as the boys edged toward the water's edge. She spread out a large blanket while Caleb set up the umbrellas. Theo stood at the wet sand's edge, hesitating. The waves lapped gently, but he'd been so fearful of water since the pool incident. Caleb noticed his uncertainty and walked over, crouching beside him. "Want to do some brave breaths?" he asked quietly. Theo nodded, his small hand finding Caleb's larger one. Together they did their counting. In for 4, hold for 4, out for 4. After a few cycles, Theo's grip relaxed. "Look," Caleb pointed to a shallow pool left by the receding tide. "That's called a tide pool. Want to see what lives in there?" Theo nodded again, more eagerly this time. They walked over together, Caleb matching the boys' careful steps. As they approached, tiny fish darted in the crystal-clear water. "Fish!" Theo whispered, his face lighting up. It was the kind of pure joy that made everyone watching smile. Tomas ran over to join them. "Can I see too?" Soon both boys were crouched by the tide pool, pointing out tiny crabs and sea anemones. Caleb explained how each creature lived, drawing on memories of marine biology classes. When a hermit crab emerged from its shell, Theo actually laughed, a clear, bell-like sound that made Naomi's breath catch. She walked over to join them, leaving her shoes by the blanket. The wet sand felt cool between her toes. "Having fun?" Theo looked up at her, eyes bright. "Mama, look, baby crabs." Rosa brought over the bucket, now filled with a little seawater. "Why don't we make them a temporary home while we watch them?" The next hour passed in peaceful exploration. They found more tide pools as the tide continued to go out, each one a tiny world to discover. Theo grew braver, stepping into the shallow pools with his water shoes on. His previous fear seemed forgotten in the face of such fascinating discoveries. By mid-morning, the sun had warmed the air considerably. Rosa pulled out snacks from the cooler, fresh fruit, sandwiches, and juice boxes. They sat together on the blanket, the boys still chattering about their findings. "I never knew there was so much life in those little pools," Naomi said, watching Theo take careful bites of his sandwich, sand still clinging to his hands despite her attempts to clean them. "The ocean's full of surprises," Caleb replied. Their eyes met briefly, and something warm passed between them. After lunch, the boys wanted to build sandcastles. Caleb showed them how to mix just the right amount of water with the sand to make it hold its shape. Soon they had the beginnings of a fortress, complete with a moat that filled with each gentle wave. Naomi joined in, helping to decorate the walls with shells they'd collected. She couldn't remember the last time she'd played like this, without checking her phone or worrying about the next meeting. Here, with the rhythm of the waves and the sound of children's laughter, the world felt simpler. As the afternoon wore on, Rosa took the boys down to the water's edge to wash off some sand. Naomi and Caleb sat side by side, watching the kids splash in the shallows. "Thank you," Naomi said softly. "For what?" "For helping him find his joy again. I'd almost forgotten what his laugh sounded like." Caleb turned to look at her, his eyes serious. "He's a strong kid. Sometimes they just need someone to show them it's safe to be strong." The setting sun painted the sky in brilliant oranges and pinks, casting long shadows across their sandcastle empire. Rosa had taken the boys a little way down the beach to search for one last special shell before they left. Naomi and Caleb stood close together, watching the sun sink toward the horizon. A gentle breeze carried the salt air around them, and Naomi shivered slightly. Without a word, Caleb moved closer, offering warmth. She turned toward him, sand shifting beneath her feet. His hand found hers, warm and steady. The moment stretched between them, like golden light across water. Their faces drew closer, the space between them charged with possibility. Below them, at the water's edge, Tomas's voice rang out. "Look what we found! The biggest shell ever! The children's footsteps pounded up the beach, their excitement breaking the spell of the moment. Naomi and Caleb stepped apart, both smiling at the approaching boys. Theo clutched a large spiral shell in his hands, his face glowing with pride as he held it up for them to see. The morning sun streamed through the floor-to-ceiling windows of Gregory Dane's corner office, casting long shadows across his polished mahogany desk. Naomi sat across from him, her posture straight and determined, a manila folder placed precisely in front of her. "I have everything here, Gregory," Naomi said quietly, her voice steady despite her racing heart. "Dates, text messages, photos." She opened the folder with deliberate care. "And this?" She slid a sealed DNA test kit across the desk. Gregory's carefully maintained composure flickered. He glanced at the kit, then out the window at the cityscape below, his fingers drumming an anxious rhythm on his armrest. "What exactly do you want from me?" His voice held a hint of strain. "The truth. And then we can discuss what's right for Tomas." Gregory stood abruptly, pacing behind his desk. "You don't understand the complications. My position, my reputation." "I understand perfectly," Naomi interrupted, her tone firm but not unkind. "I understand a little boy who draws pictures of an absent father. I understand a mother who's carried this burden alone for 8 years. She spread out several documents, including printed text messages and dated photographs. One showed a much younger Rosa, at a company holiday party, Gregory standing close beside her, his hand on her shoulder. Gregory sank back into his chair, suddenly looking older than his years. "It was complicated. My wife was still alive then. Rosa was so young, so eager to please." He rubbed his temples. "When she told me she was pregnant, I panicked. Had my lawyer handle everything." "Handle everything?" Naomi's voice carried a sharp edge. "You mean pay her off and threaten her job if she ever spoke up?" "I made sure she was taken care of." Gregory's voice rose defensively. "She kept her position, got regular raises, but never acknowledgement. Never support beyond the bare minimum to keep her quiet." Naomi leaned forward. "Tomas deserves better. Rosa deserves better." Gregory's shoulders slumped. "What do you want me to do?" Naomi pulled out a legal document. "My attorney drew this up. It's fair, Gregory. A proper support agreement for Tomas. Education, health care, a trust fund. No public announcement required, but full acknowledgement to Tomas and Rosa. No more hiding." Gregory studied the paper, his expression unreadable. "And if I refuse, then I'll have to reconsider my position on this board." Naomi met his gaze steadily. "I won't be complicit in denying that child his father any longer." Minutes ticked by in tense silence. Finally, Gregory reached for his pen. "You're certain about the privacy provisions? Everything stays confidential, unless you choose otherwise. This is about doing right by Tomas, not about punishment." Gregory signed with a quick, decisive motion. "I'll have my lawyer review the trust fund details tomorrow." He handed the document back to Naomi. "I do care, you know, about both of them. I just never knew how to face it." "It's never too late to start," Naomi said softly, gathering her materials. "Rosa brings Tomas to the park every Saturday morning. He loves the swings." Gregory nodded, turning back to the window. "Thank you, Naomi, for handling this with discretion." Later that afternoon, Naomi found Caleb in the hotel garden, watching Theo feed the koi in the ornamental pond. The little boy carefully dropped food pellets one at a time, counting each splash. 7, 8, 9. Theo concentrated, his tongue poking out slightly. Naomi settled on the bench beside Caleb, letting out a long breath. "It's done. Gregory signed the agreement." Caleb turned to her, his eyes searching her face. "How did he take it?" "Better than I expected, I think. I think part of him is actually relieved." She watched Theo giggle as the fish swirled beneath the surface. "He's agreed to proper support for Tomas, though he wants to keep it private for now." "And Rosa?" "I'm meeting her tonight to go over everything." Naomi's shoulders relaxed slightly. "Maybe things can finally calm down around here." But even as she spoke the words, a shadow of doubt crossed her face, and she found herself wringing her hands in her lap. Naomi's phone buzzed incessantly on her kitchen counter early Monday morning. She ignored it at first, focused on helping Theo with his breakfast. The little boy was having a good morning, carefully spooning cereal into his mouth while humming softly, a new habit he'd picked up from Caleb. Another buzz, then another, and another. "Miss Ellison." Her assistant's voice came through when she finally answered. "I think you need to see this." Naomi opened the link her assistant sent, and her heart dropped. There on her screen, splashed across one of the city's most prominent news websites, was a photo of Caleb with his arm protectively around Theo at the beach. The headline screamed in bold letters, "Mystery Man inserts himself into CEO's family." Her hands trembled as she scrolled through the article. Anonymous sources questioned Caleb's background, his intentions, and his relationship with her family. The article painted him as an opportunist who had orchestrated the pool incident to gain access to her wealth and influence. Theo looked up at her, sensing her distress. "Mama okay?" "Yes, baby," she managed, though her voice shook. "Finish your breakfast." Her phone lit up again, this time with a text from Rosa. "They're saying terrible things about him on TV, too." Naomi switched on the kitchen television, something she rarely did during breakfast. Sure enough, there was Caleb's face on the morning news, with commentators speculating about his suspicious timing and convenient heroics. Sources close to the board suggest that Mr. Hart's military record may have inconsistencies, one reporter announced with barely concealed glee. Questions are being raised about his qualifications as a child safety specialist. Naomi knew exactly who those sources were. Gregory's fingerprints were all over this, despite their agreement. She should have known he wouldn't keep his word. Her phone rang again. Caleb this time. She answered immediately. "Naomi, I'm so sorry." His voice was heavy with concern. "I never meant to bring this kind of attention to you or Theo. This isn't your fault," she said firmly. "Gregory's behind this. He's trying to discredit you before." "Before what?" Caleb asked when she didn't finish. "Before I can expose his lies about Tomas," she whispered, making sure Theo couldn't hear. "He's trying to make me look unstable, question my judgment." "Miss Ellison?" It was her assistant again on the other line. "The board is calling an emergency meeting. They're citing concerns about company image and leadership stability." Naomi closed her eyes, trying to steady herself. "When?" "In 1 hour." She ended both calls and dialed Rosa. "Can you come watch Theo? There's an emergency at work." "Of course," Rosa replied. "But Naomi, there are reporters outside your gate." Looking out her front window, Naomi saw them. At least a dozen news vans and photographers, their cameras aimed at her house like weapons. Rosa arrived through the back entrance 20 minutes later, her face drawn with worry. "They're saying horrible things about Caleb on social media," she said softly. "And some of the comments. They're making assumptions about you both." Naomi nodded grimly. She knew what Rosa meant. She'd seen the racist undertones in some of the coverage, the barely veiled suggestions about her relationship with Caleb. "Stay inside with Theo," she instructed. "Don't answer the door or the phone for anyone." She made it to her car through the garage, but reporters swarmed her vehicle as she tried to leave. Camera flashes exploded around her as she carefully navigated through the crowd. The board meeting was exactly what she expected, a carefully orchestrated attack. Gregory sat at the head of the table, his expression one of manufactured concern. "We're worried about your judgment, Naomi," he said smoothly. "First this unusual arrangement with Mr. Hart, and now we're hearing disturbing rumors about you making unfounded accusations against respected board members." Several board members shifted uncomfortably in their seats. They knew what Gregory was referring to, even if they didn't know the full truth. "The company's stock has already dropped 3 points this morning," another board member added. "We need to address this situation immediately." "By situation, you mean Caleb?" Naomi's voice was ice. "The man who saved my son's life? The man whose background check suddenly shows concerning gaps," Gregory countered. "The security footage from the pool incident appears to have been misplaced. Rather convenient, wouldn't you say?" Naomi felt the trap closing around her. They'd planned this well, discredit Caleb, question her stability, and bury any chance she had of exposing Gregory's secret. Her phone vibrated. A text from Rosa. "Security guards are here. They're removing Caleb's access badges." Another message followed quickly. "He's being escorted out. Theo's crying for him." Naomi stood up, her chair scraping against the floor. "This meeting is over. I need to get home to my son." "Naomi," Gregory's voice stopped her at the door. "The board will need to take action if you continue down this path. For the good of the company, of course." The threat was clear. Back off, or lose everything. The drive home was a blur of anxiety and anger. When she pulled into her driveway, Rosa met her at the garage door, her face pale. "Theo's finally calmed down," she reported. "But Naomi, there's something else." Before she could explain, a sharp knock echoed through the house. Through the security camera feed, Naomi saw two people standing at her front door, a man and woman in professional attire, holding clipboards. "Ms. Ellison?" the woman called out. "This is Child Protective Services. We need to speak with you regarding some concerns that have been raised about your son's safety." Naomi's world tilted sideways. She grabbed the kitchen counter to steady herself, her other hand pressing against her chest where her heart was threatening to burst. Rosa touched her arm gently. "What do you want me to do?" Through the window, Naomi could see more reporters gathering, their cameras trained on the CPS workers at her door. This was Gregory's final move. Not just threatening her position or reputation, but going after what mattered most. Theo. The knock came again, more insistent this time. "Ms. Ellison, we really need to speak with you." Naomi straightened her spine, years of boardroom battles helping her find her composure. But inside, where no one could see, something precious and hopeful shattered into 1,000 pieces. The fragile peace she'd built, the tender possibility of love with Caleb, the justice she'd sought for Rosa and Tomaz, all of it seemed to be crumbling around her. A gentle knock at the door made Theo duck behind Caleb's legs. Naomi smoothed her skirt, took a deep breath, and opened it to find two CPS workers, a tall woman with kind eyes and a younger man clutching a tablet. "Ms. Ellison? I'm Sandra Thompson from Child Protective Services, and this is my colleague, Marcus Chen. We need to discuss some concerns that have been brought to our attention." Naomi's CEO composure kicked in automatically. "Of course. Please come in." She led them to the living room, where sunlight streamed through large windows onto comfortable furniture. Theo remained glued to Caleb, tiny fingers gripping the fabric of his pants. "Mr. Hart," Sandra addressed Caleb directly, "we understand you've been spending significant time with Theo recently." "Yes, ma'am." Caleb's voice was steady and respectful. "I was hired as his safety aide after preventing an accident at the hotel pool." Marcus tapped on his tablet. "We have some questions about that incident. The security footage appears to be unavailable." "Missing?" Naomi's eyebrows shot up. "That's impossible. There are cameras everywhere in that hotel." Nevertheless, Sandra's tone remained professional but grew firmer. "We need to establish the nature of Mr. Hart's relationship with your family. There are concerns about the speed of his integration into Theo's life." Theo whimpered softly, and Caleb instinctively reached down to pat his shoulder. The gesture didn't go unnoticed by the CPS workers. "Mr. Hart, we'll need you to step away from the child during our discussion," Marcus said. Before anyone could move, Naomi's phone rang. It was the hotel's HR director. She excused herself briefly, stepping into the kitchen. When she returned, her face was tight with controlled anger. "Caleb," she said quietly, "the hotel has suspended you pending an investigation." His jaw clenched, but he nodded. "I understand." He knelt down to Theo's level. "Hey, buddy, I need to go talk to some people at work. Can you be brave for me?" Theo's lower lip trembled, but he whispered, "Brave breaths?" "That's right, just like we practiced." Caleb demonstrated the counting rhythm they'd developed. In, hold, out. Sandra watched the interaction closely, making notes. As Caleb stood to leave, she said, "Mr. Hart, please don't leave town. We'll need to speak with you separately." After Caleb left, Theo ran to Naomi, burying his face in her lap. She stroked his hair while answering the CPS workers' questions about her work schedule, Theo's therapy appointments, and the circumstances of hiring Caleb. "Ms. Ellison." Sandra leaned forward. We're particularly concerned about reports that Mr. Hart has been present during Theo's therapy sessions. That's highly irregular. At my request, Naomi clarified. Theo has made remarkable progress since a commotion in the kitchen interrupted them. Rosa had arrived for work and she was crying. "I'm so sorry, Miss Naomi," Rosa managed between sobs. "Mr. Dane," he called. "He says I must go." Naomi's heart sank. Gregory was moving faster than she'd anticipated, systematically dismantling her support system. She excused herself from the CPS workers and guided Rosa to the kitchen. "He can't fire you," Naomi assured her, though uncertainty gnawed at her stomach. "You work for me, not him." "But the board," Rosa wrung her hands. "He says they will vote. That I am. How did he say? A liability. That my presence here is inappropriate now." Naomi pulled Rosa into a hug, feeling the other woman's shoulders shake. In the living room, she could hear Sandra gently questioning Theo, who had gone silent again. The morning sun that had seemed so bright earlier now felt harsh and exposing. "Listen to me," Naomi said firmly, holding Rosa at arm's length. "Gregory Dane does not have the power to fire you. I am your employer, and you are excellent at your job. More than that, you're family to us." Rosa wiped her eyes. "He knows things about my papers from years ago. Before everything was proper, he says, no." Naomi's voice was steel. "Whatever he's threatening, we'll fight it. Together." She squeezed Rosa's hands. "I need you to trust me. Can you do that?" Rosa nodded slowly, but her eyes still held fear. "What about Tomas? His school?" "We'll continue exactly as planned." Naomi grabbed a tissue box from the counter and handed it to Rosa. "Gregory's trying to scare us into silence. But he's the one who should be scared." In the living room, Sandra was packing up her materials. Naomi returned just in time to hear her final assessment. "We'll be conducting a thorough investigation, Miss Ellison. In the meantime, we strongly recommend limiting contact between Theo and Mr. Cation Hart." She paused, her expression softening slightly. "I can see Theo has made progress, but we need to ensure all proper procedures are being followed." After they left, Naomi found herself in her sunny kitchen, surrounded by the pieces of her carefully constructed world. Rosa was wiping her eyes while mechanically starting lunch preparations. Theo sat at the counter, pushing his cereal around without eating. "Brave breaths," he whispered to himself. "In, hold, out." The simple counting practice Caleb had taught him seemed to steady them all. Naomi watched her son, saw the shadow of fear returning to his eyes, and felt a fierce determination rise in her chest. Gregory Dane had miscalculated badly if he thought threatening her family would make her back down. Rosa sniffled quietly while chopping vegetables. Maybe I should go, Miss Naomi. Just for a little while, until—" "You're not going anywhere," Naomi said firmly, wrapping an arm around Rosa's shoulders. "We're going to get through this together, all of us." Naomi sat at her desk, reviewing quarterly reports, when her assistant Marcus knocked and entered with an envelope. His face was tight with concern. "Miss Ellison, this just arrived by courier. It's marked urgent and confidential." The heavy cream envelope bore the letterhead of Preston Associates, Gregory's longtime law firm. Naomi's hands trembled slightly as she opened it. As she read, the words seemed to blur together, but certain phrases jumped out with brutal clarity. Emergency petition, temporary injunction, custody evaluation, pattern of unstable decision-making, unsuitable influences, immediate intervention required. Her throat constricted. Gregory was actually trying to challenge her fitness as a parent. The legal document suggested that her recent erratic behavior and questionable associations warranted an emergency review of Theo's custody arrangement. She pressed her palms flat against the cool surface of her desk, trying to steady herself. The morning light streaming through her office windows suddenly felt harsh and exposing. "Marcus," she called, her voice remarkably steady despite the turmoil inside. "Please clear my schedule for the next hour." Once alone, Naomi read the document carefully, paragraph by painful paragraph. Gregory had crafted a masterful narrative of concern, her impulsive hiring of an unvetted stranger, her emotional instability following her husband's death, her potentially compromised judgment in company matters. He'd even twisted her defense of Rosa into evidence of poor decision-making. Her phone buzzed. A text from Caleb. "Heard about the filing. Are you okay?" She started to type, "I'm fine," but deleted it. The words felt hollow. Instead, she wrote, "Processing. Need time." Rising from her desk, Naomi walked to the window. 15 stories below, people hurried along the sidewalks, their lives continuing normally while hers seemed to be crumbling. She pressed her forehead against the cool glass, remembering Theo's face this morning as she'd dropped him at preschool, his shy smile, the way he'd waved goodbye. The thought of losing him made her chest physically ache. A knock interrupted her thoughts. "Come in," she called, quickly straightening her posture. Linda Chen, her general counsel, entered with a thick folder. "I've reviewed the filing," she said without preamble. "It's aggressive but not unexpected given recent events." "Not unexpected?" Naomi turned, fighting to keep her voice level. "He's trying to take my son." Linda's expression softened. "He's trying to scare you, Naomi. This is about control, not custody. Gregory knows his position as board chair is threatened. He's using Theo as leverage. By painting me as an unfit mother?" The words tasted bitter. "By making you choose between fighting him and protecting your son." Linda placed the folder on Naomi's desk. "We have options, but you need to be prepared. This will get messier before it gets better." Naomi sank into her chair, suddenly exhausted. "What are our next steps?" "First, we file a strong response. We can demonstrate your exemplary parenting record, Theo's progress since James's death, the support system you've built." Linda paused. "But Naomi, we need to address the Caleb situation." "There is no situation," Naomi said sharply. "He saved my son's life. And Gregory is spinning that into a narrative about your judgment. The timing of hiring him, the growing closeness—" "Stop," Naomi held up her hand. "I won't let Gregory's tactics make me doubt the one person who's helped Theo find his voice again." Linda nodded slowly. "Then we need to be strategic about how we present that relationship. The court will want—" Another knock interrupted them. Marcus appeared in the doorway, his face pale. "Ms. Ellison, the press is gathering in the lobby. They're asking for comment about the custody filing." Naomi's stomach dropped. Of course, Gregory had leaked it to the media. She could already imagine the headlines. "CEO's fitness," as mother questioned. Her hand instinctively went to her neck, where she still wore James's wedding ring on a chain. "No comment," Linda said firmly. "Marcus, implement our media protocol. Direct all inquiries to the communications team." After Marcus left, Naomi stood again, needing to move. "I need to pick up Theo early today. I don't want him hearing about this from anyone else." "Good idea," Linda agreed. "I'll have a detailed response strategy for you by tomorrow morning." "And Naomi?" She waited until their eyes met. "We'll fight this. You're not alone." But as soon as Linda left, the weight of solitude pressed in. Naomi gathered her things with mechanical precision, her mind racing. She needed to call Theo's therapist, contact the school, prepare Rosa for the media attention that might come her way. The private elevator helped her avoid the press, but as she walked to her car in the underground garage, her carefully maintained composure began to crack. Inside the quiet sanctuary of her vehicle, the first tears finally fell. "Lord, help me," she whispered, her voice breaking. She gripped the steering wheel until her knuckles turned white, letting the tears flow freely now. In this moment, she wasn't a CEO or a public figure. She was just a mother, terrified of losing her child. For several minutes, she sat there in the dim garage, her quiet sobs echoing in the empty space. Each tear carried the weight of her fears. For Theo, for Rosa and Tomas, for the truth she knew needed to come to light. But most of all, she cried for the simple joy she'd just begun to rediscover. The warmth of community, the possibility of new love, the sound of her son's laughter. Now threatened by Gregory's cruel manipulation. "Lord, help me," she whispered again, softer this time, as the tears gradually slowed. Late afternoon sunlight filtered through the stained glass windows of First Grace Church, casting colorful shadows across the empty pews. Caleb sat in the front row, his head bowed and hands clasped. His security badge from the hotel lay on the wooden bench beside him, a reminder of everything he'd lost. The quiet shuffle of footsteps echoed through the sanctuary. Pastor Lila emerged from her office, carrying 2 steaming mugs of tea. Her silver hair caught the light as she made her way down the center aisle. "I thought you might need this," she said softly, offering him one of the mugs. "It's chamomile." "Thank you, Pastor." Caleb accepted the tea, wrapping his hands around the warm ceramic. The familiar scent reminded him of quiet evenings with his late wife. Pastor Lila settled beside him, smoothing her simple navy dress. "I haven't seen you look this troubled since you first came home from overseas." Caleb stared into his tea. "I feel like I've failed them." Theo was finally speaking again. Naomi was starting to trust me. Rosa and Tomas needed protection. He shook his head. "Now Gregory's using me to hurt them all. Tell me what's in your heart, son." "I keep thinking about what Jesus said about protecting children," Caleb said. "But every time I try to help, it seems to make things worse." Pastor Lila took a thoughtful sip of her tea. "Do you remember what we talked about when you were struggling after Sarah passed? About how sometimes God uses our deepest wounds to help others heal?" "I remember." Caleb's voice was rough. "You said pain shared is pain halved. The truth is," Pastor Lila continued, "you've brought more healing to that little boy in 2 weeks than anyone has in months. Not because you're perfect, but because you're genuine. You see him. You understand his hurt. But now Gregory's using that connection against Naomi, saying she's unstable for letting me near Theo. And why do you think Gregory is so threatened by your presence?" Caleb considered this. "Because truth makes darkness uncomfortable." "Exactly." Pastor Lila set her mug down and turned to face him fully. "Caleb, listen to me carefully. Truth, spoken in love, is still truth. It doesn't stop being true just because someone tries to twist it." The words settled deep in Caleb's chest. He thought about Theo's whispered, "Thank you," by the pool, about Rosa's quiet dignity in the face of Gregory's denial, about Naomi's determined stance against injustice. "I was trained to run toward danger," he said quietly, "to help people others couldn't reach. Maybe that's still my calling, just in a different way now." "The Lord doesn't waste our experiences," Pastor Lila agreed. "Sometimes the very things that wounded us become the tools He uses to heal others." Caleb picked up his security badge, turning it over in his hands. Something clicked in his memory, a detail from his military days that might change everything. "Pastor Lila," he said slowly, "thank you for the tea and the reminder." He stood, purpose returning to his stance. "I need to make a phone call." "Of course." She smiled knowingly. "I'll be here if you need me." Caleb stepped into the church courtyard, pulling out his phone. His fingers hovered over the keypad before dialing a number he hadn't used in years. "Hey, Mike. It's Caleb Hart. Remember that security system mirroring protocol we used in Baghdad? I need to know if you're still doing that kind of work." The conversation that followed would change everything, but Caleb didn't know that yet. He only knew that truth spoken in love was still truth, and sometimes truth needed a little help coming to light. The late afternoon sun cast long shadows across Naomi's home office as she paced, phone pressed to her ear. Her normally pristine desk was covered with legal papers and newspaper clippings. Dark circles under her eyes betrayed nights of lost sleep. "Yes, I understand the board's concerns," she said, her voice steady despite her exhaustion. "But I won't be bullied into silence. The fundraiser will proceed as scheduled." She ended the call and sank into her leather chair, rubbing her temples. A soft knock at the door made her look up. Rosa stood in the doorway, wringing her hands in her apron. "Ms. Naomi, Mr. Caleb is here. He says it's important." Naomi straightened, smoothing her silk blouse. "Send him in, please." Caleb entered, still wearing his Marine Corps veteran cap, his expression determined. "I think I found something," he said without preamble, "about the security footage Gregory claims went missing." Naomi leaned forward, hope flickering in her eyes. "What do you mean? Remember my buddy Marcus I mentioned? The one who works in cybersecurity? Caleb settled into the chair across from her desk. When I was first hired at the hotel, he helped set up their security system. Standard procedure included creating backup mirrors of all camera feeds. Mirrors? Naomi's brow furrowed. Duplicate recordings stored on separate servers, Caleb explained. It's a safety measure in case the main system fails. Marcus just confirmed those backups still exist, including the footage from the night of Theo's rescue. Naomi's hands trembled slightly as she reached for her water glass. And it shows everything? The rescue, Theo's words. Everything, Caleb nodded. Marcus can have the files ready within hours, but Naomi. He leaned forward, his voice gentling. What do you plan to do with them? Standing, Naomi walked to the window. Outside, Theo and Tomas played in the garden under Rosa's watchful eye. Their laughter drifted up, precious and pure. The annual Children's Hospital fundraiser is in 2 days, she said. Gregory expects me to make a public apology, to step down temporarily, while the board investigates my fitness as CEO. She turned back to Caleb, steel in her spine. Instead, I'm going to tell the truth. All of it. The press will be there, Caleb cautioned. Once this gets out, I know. Naomi's voice was firm. But I've spent my whole career being careful, diplomatic, perfect. And what has it gotten us? Gregory still uses his power to hurt people. Rosa lives in fear. Tomas grows up without a father. She shook her head. Sometimes doing right matters more than looking right. Caleb stood, moving to join her at the window. You could lose everything. I already am. She gestured to the legal papers on her desk. Gregory's lawyers are trying to paint me as unstable, unsuitable to care for Theo. As if hiring you to protect my son somehow proves I'm unfit. Her voice caught. But watching you with him, seeing how you've helped him find his voice again, that's not weakness. That's being a mother. The footage will help, Caleb said softly. It shows exactly what happened. No staging, no manipulation. Just a soldier's instinct to protect a child. Naomi turned to face him fully. Will you stand with me? At the fundraiser? You know I will. His voice was steady, certain. But not just as security. As someone who believes in what you're doing. She studied his face, the quiet strength, the unwavering integrity that had drawn her to trust him from the start. I need to write my speech, she said. Will you help me? You have a way of making complicated things clear. Of course. He pulled out his phone. I'll tell Marcus to start processing those files. We'll need them ready before the event. Thank you. Naomi's shoulders relaxed slightly. Not just for this, for everything. For showing Theo what a real hero looks like. Caleb's eyes softened. That boy is the real hero. Standing up again after everything he's been through? That takes courage. Like mother, like son. Naomi managed a small smile. Exactly like that. Caleb held out his hand. Partners in truth? Naomi clasped it firmly, feeling the strength of his grip anchor her. Partners in truth. The late afternoon sun painted them both in gold as they stood together, hands joined, ready to face whatever storm was coming. Through the window, Theo's laughter rose again, the sound of hope refusing to be silenced. The grand ballroom of the Riverside Hotel glittered with camera lights and evening wear. Reporters lined the back wall, their equipment trained on the podium. The annual Children's Hope Foundation fundraiser had drawn an even larger crowd than usual, hungry for drama after the recent headlines. Naomi stood in the wings, smoothing her royal blue dress with trembling hands. Through the curtain, she could see Gregory Dane working the room, moving from donor to donor with practiced charm. His silver hair caught the light as he laughed at someone's joke, looking every bit the respected philanthropist. You've got this, Caleb whispered from behind her. He wore a clean-pressed suit that Rosa had helped him choose, his military bearing making him look distinguished despite Gregory's attempts to paint him as an intruder. Naomi squeezed his hand, drawing strength from his steady presence. The truth matters more than my reputation, she said, as much to herself as to him. The hotel manager approached the podium, tapping the microphone. Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome our CEO and chairwoman Naomi Ellison. Applause filled the room as Naomi walked onto the stage, her heels clicking against the hardwood. She took her place behind the podium, facing the sea of expectant faces. Camera flashes popped like lightning. "Good evening," she began, her voice clear and strong. "Many of you have read recent stories about our foundation in the press. Tonight, I'd like to speak about truth." A murmur rippled through the crowd. In the front row, Gregory's smile flickered. "2 weeks ago, a former Marine named Caleb Hart saved my son from falling into our pool. That act of courage brought him into our lives, where he has shown nothing but integrity and compassion." Naomi paused, meeting Gregory's eyes. The suggestion that this rescue was staged was a deliberate lie, spread by someone who feared what else might come to light. The room grew still. Reporters leaned forward, pens poised. "We talk about protecting children here at the Foundation, but protection isn't just about physical safety. It's about standing up for what's right, even when it costs us." Naomi's voice grew stronger. "That's why I must address another truth. Our board chair, Gregory Dane, has been using his position to threaten and silence a member of our staff, Rosa Martinez, and her 8-year-old son, Tomas." Gregory shot to his feet, his face flushing. "This is outrageous. Mr. Dane knows exactly what I'm talking about," Naomi continued, speaking over his protest. "He knows about the DNA test results. He knows about the confidential agreement he signed and then broke. And he knows that every attempt to discredit me and Caleb Hart has been a desperate move to keep his own actions hidden." Camera shutters clicked rapidly. Several donors were already whispering and checking their phones. "Rosa Martinez has served this foundation faithfully for 9 years. Her son Tomas is a bright, loving boy who deserves to be acknowledged by his father." Naomi turned directly to Gregory. "Mr. Dane, I invite you now to do the right thing. Stop the threats. Stop the lies. Your legacy isn't just about the money you've given, it's about how you treat people who have less power than you do." Gregory stood frozen for a moment, then forced a laugh. "This is absurd. Ms. Ellison is clearly unstable, as recent events have shown. I have lawyers." "Actually," Caleb's voice cut through the tension as he stepped forward from the wings, holding up a flash drive, "we have something more concrete than lawyers." He nodded to the tech booth, and the large screens behind the stage flickered to life. Crystal-clear security footage began to play, showing Theo's near fall and Caleb's rescue in perfect detail. The timestamp was clearly visible. "My old Marine buddy works in digital security," Caleb explained calmly. "The hotel's backup systems mirror to an off-site server. Funny how the original footage disappeared right after Mr. Dane visited the security office." The room erupted in gasps and exclamations. Gregory's face had gone from red to ashen. More footage began to play Gregory slipping envelopes to security staff, having heated conversations with lawyers in hallways, all with clear timestamps that matched Naomi's timeline exactly. "The truth," Naomi said into the stunned silence, "will always come to light." A woman in the third row stood up. "I'm pulling my company's donation," she announced firmly. "Unless the board takes immediate action." Like dominoes falling, other donors began to stand. Gregory looked around wildly, his carefully constructed world crumbling before his eyes. Naomi let the moment stretch, cameras capturing every second. Here in the bright lights, with all pretense stripped away, the great Gregory Dane finally looked exactly what he was, a man who had spent years building his reputation on quicksand. "The board will convene immediately," announced a silver-haired woman who served as vice chair. She fixed Gregory with a steely gaze. "Mr. Dane, I suggest you join us in the conference room. Now." Gregory opened his mouth, closed it, then turned sharply and stalked toward the exit. The clicking of cameras followed his retreat. Naomi gripped the podium, her knees weak with relief, but her spine still straight. Caleb moved to stand beside her, a quiet guardian as reporters began shouting questions. The truth was out. Whatever came next, they would face it together. In the back of the room, Rosa stood with Tomas held close, tears streaming down her face. But they were tears of relief, of long-carried burdens finally set down. Her son looked up at her and whispered, "Is it okay now, Mama?" Rosa kissed his forehead, watching as Naomi and Caleb fielded the barrage of press questions with unwavering dignity. "Yes, mi amor," she said softly. "I think it finally is." The cameras continued to flash, capturing the moment when truth spoke louder than power, when love proved stronger than fear, and when one woman's courage changed everything. The massive screens flanking the stage flickered to life. Crystal-clear security footage showed the poolside scene from multiple angles. The timestamp matched the night of the first gala, proving there had been no tampering. In stark black and white, little Theo wandered near the slick tiles. The cameras caught every detail, his uncertain steps, the way his small shoes slipped on the wet surface. Then came Caleb's lightning-fast response. His trained instincts took over as he lunged forward, strong arms reaching out just as Theo's balance failed. The audience watched, spellbound, as Caleb caught the boy mid-fall. The footage captured their embrace, Theo's arms wrapping trustingly around Caleb's neck. Though the security video had no audio, everyone remembered the whispered, "Stay," that had broken months of silence. Gasps rippled through the ballroom. Several board members shifted uncomfortably in their seats. Gregory's face had gone pale, his earlier smugness evaporating as the irrefutable evidence played out before hundreds of witnesses. "As you can see," Naomi's voice rang clear and steady, "there was no manipulation, no staging, just a brave man who saw a child in danger and acted without hesitation." She turned to where Caleb stood quietly at the side of the stage. "A man who has continued to protect and care for not just my son, but all the children in his path." Rosa sat in the front row, holding Tomas close. Tears streamed down her face as she watched the truth unfold. Her son squirmed in her lap, pointing excitedly at the screen. "Look, Mama, like when he teaches me to swim." The footage continued, showing the aftermath. Hotel security's hostile questioning of Caleb played out in damning detail. The timestamps jumped forward, revealing Gregory's late-night meetings with lawyers, his attempts to access the security office, the systematic effort to discredit a hero. "The truth cannot be buried," Naomi declared, her voice gaining strength, "not about that night, and not about other matters that affect the children we claim to protect." She met Gregory's eyes directly. "Mr. Dane, you've used your position to threaten those who depend on this foundation. You've tried to separate a little boy from the only parent he has left. You've denied your own child while attempting to destroy others' families." The room fell silent. Gregory started to rise, but the board president placed a restraining hand on his arm. The older man's face was grave as he watched the evidence mount. Caleb stepped forward then, not to take over, but to stand as witness. His quiet presence lent weight to Naomi's words. He held a flash drive in his hand, proof that copies of the footage existed, insurance against further attempts at cover-ups. "This foundation exists to help children," Naomi continued. "All children, including those whose parents work in our kitchens, clean our rooms, or serve our guests. We cannot claim to protect some while allowing others to be threatened or ignored." She paused, allowing her words to sink in. The cameras continued rolling, broadcasting live to local networks. In the back of the room, reporters scribbled furiously in their notebooks. "I stand here today, not just as CEO, but as a mother. I know what it means to want the best for your child, to fight for their future." Her voice softened. "And I've learned what it means to find unexpected allies in that fight, to discover that family isn't always about blood, it's about who shows up, who stays, who protects." A small movement caught everyone's attention. Theo had slipped away from his caregiver and was making his way toward the stage. The audience watched, breathless, as he carefully climbed the steps. His little shoes made soft tapping sounds on the wooden platform. Caleb started forward instinctively, ready to help, but Theo managed on his own. He walked straight to his mother, his face serious and determined. Without hesitation, he reached for the microphone. Naomi knelt beside him, steadying the mic as he gripped it with both hands. The room held its collective breath, remembering the months of silence that had followed his mother's death, the whispered words by the pool that had started everything. Theo's voice came out clear and strong, filled with the simple conviction of a child who knows what matters. My family helps people. The impact was immediate and overwhelming. Women dabbed at their eyes with elaborate handkerchiefs. Hard-faced businessmen looked away, blinking rapidly. Rosa buried her face in Tomas's hair, shoulders shaking with emotion. The applause started slowly, a few hands at first, then building like a wave until it filled the massive ballroom. People rose to their feet, their ovation carrying all the weight of truth finally spoken, of justice finally served. Through it all, Theo stood holding the microphone, a small figure in his neat suit, while Naomi knelt beside him with one arm protectively around his shoulders. Caleb remained a steady presence nearby, his eyes bright with pride and unshed tears. The sound of hundreds of people clapping, some crying openly now, echoed off the gilded ceiling. Camera flashes captured the moment. Not a staged rescue this time, but a real miracle. A little boy's heart healing, a community choosing truth over power, a family formed, not by convention but by love and courage. The mahogany-paneled boardroom felt different this morning. Sunlight streamed through tall windows, warming the space that had held so many tense conversations. The board members, dressed in their usual business attire, sat straighter than usual. The weight of the moment pressed upon everyone present. Gregory Dane occupied his familiar seat at the head of the table, but his usual confident posture had crumbled. His perfectly pressed suit couldn't hide the defeat in his shoulders. His manicured fingers drummed nervously on the polished wood. Naomi Ellison sat composed, her dark eyes steady as the board secretary read the motion. The board moves to remove Gregory Dane as chairman, effective immediately, due to actions unbecoming of leadership and breach of fiduciary duty. The room fell silent. One by one, hands rose. The vote wasn't even close. Motion carries, the secretary announced, her voice crisp in the hushed room. Mr. Dane is hereby removed as chairman of the board. Gregory's face flushed red, but he remained silent. His lawyer, a thin man with wire-rimmed glasses, slid papers across the table. The paternity acknowledgement and trust agreement lay stark against the dark wood. "Sign it, Gregory," his lawyer murmured. "It's the best path forward." With trembling fingers, Gregory picked up the pen. Each scratch of his signature seemed to pain him physically. When he finished, he pushed back his chair with a harsh scrape. "I hope you're all satisfied," he said, his voice bitter. "Decades of service ended like this." Naomi spoke for the first time, her voice gentle but firm. "This isn't about ending anything, Gregory. It's about beginning something new, about doing what's right." In the outer office, Rosa sat with Tomas, her hands clasped tightly in her lap. When the boardroom door opened, she stood quickly, pulling her son close. Gregory emerged first, pausing briefly to look at them. For a moment, something flickered in his eyes. Regret, perhaps, or recognition of what he'd denied for so long. "The trust is established," he said stiffly. "It's in my mother's name, the Margaret Dane Educational Trust. It will cover his schooling through college." Rosa nodded, unable to speak. Tomas looked up at the man who had finally acknowledged him, his young face solemn but unafraid. The elevator doors closed on Gregory's defeated form. Minutes later, Naomi's assistant hurried in, waving a paper. "Ms. Ellison, CPS just sent this over. They're withdrawing their investigation completely. The case is closed." Relief washed over Naomi's face. She'd been carrying that worry like a physical weight. "Thank you, Sarah. Please let Caleb know right away." The morning's tension began to dissolve. Board members filtered out, many stopping to shake Naomi's hand or offer quiet words of support. The new interim chairman, a kind-faced woman named Patricia, squeezed her arm. "You did the right thing, dear. We all saw it." When the room had emptied, Naomi found Rosa and Tomas still waiting. Rosa's eyes were bright with unshed tears, but her face glowed with something new, pride perhaps, or the simple relief of no longer having to hide. "Ms. Naomi," Rosa began, her voice wavering, "I don't know how to thank you." Naomi crossed the room in quick steps and pulled Rosa into a tight embrace. The two women held each other, years of unspoken understanding flowing between them. They had both known what it was to be strong alone, to protect their children against impossible odds. Tomas tugged gently at their skirts. When they looked down, his face was bright with wonder. "Now I'm not a secret," he whispered. Rosa knelt down, gathering her son close. "No, mi amor, never again." The morning sun streamed stronger through the windows now, touching everything with gold. In its light, the boardroom felt less like a place of power plays and more like what it should have been all along. A place where truth could triumph, where wrongs could be made right, where new beginnings could take root and grow. The table where Gregory had sat at the head for so many years now stood empty, waiting for new leadership. The papers he'd signed lay neatly stacked. Not an ending, as he'd said, but a beginning. A trust that would ensure Tomas's future, an acknowledgement that would give him his identity, a removal that would allow healing to begin. Rosa wiped her eyes, straightening her shoulders with new confidence. The fear that had haunted her for so long, fear of losing her job, fear of Gregory's power, fear for her son's future, began to fade in the warm morning light. She would stay on as household manager, her position now secure, her dignity restored. Naomi watched mother and son together, her heart full. The path to this moment had been difficult, marked with confrontations and courage, with hard choices and harder truths. But standing here now, watching Rosa hold her son in the sunlight, she knew every step had been worth it. Truth had won out. Not in a blaze of glory or a dramatic showdown, but in the quiet strength of people standing together, choosing what was right over what was easy. It had won in Tomas's innocent words that first night, in Rosa's courage to finally stand tall, in Naomi's refusal to look away from injustice. The morning stretched ahead, full of promise. There would be practical matters to attend to, new board leadership to establish, press statements to craft, programs to implement. But for now, in this sun-filled moment, 3 hearts beat with the simple joy of truth set free. Sunlight danced on the river's surface, creating sparkles that delighted Theo as he splashed in the shallows. His orange life vest kept him buoyant and safe, while Tomas, wearing a matching vest, kicked water beside him. Their laughter carried across the peaceful afternoon air. Under a sprawling oak tree, checkered blankets spread across the grass hosted a feast worthy of the church's finest potluck tradition. Pastor Lila arranged her famous deviled eggs on a paper plate, while Rosa unpacked still-warm empanadas that filled the air with mouth-watering spices. "These smell incredible, Rosa," Naomi said, helping to arrange the food. She wore a simple sundress instead of her usual business attire, her hair loose and natural in the breeze. The tension that had lined her face for months had softened into something gentler. Caleb sat cross-legged on the blanket, his eyes never straying far from the boys in the water. Even in casual clothes, his watchful presence provided a sense of security that wrapped around them all like a warm embrace. "The water's perfect today," Pastor Lila observed, pouring lemonade into plastic cups. "God gives us such beautiful days to remind us of His grace." Rosa nodded, her eyes misting as she watched Tomas playing freely, no longer burdened by secrets. "Yes, He does, and He gives us family when we need it most." "Speaking of family," Caleb said, accepting a cup from Pastor Lila, "I have some news." He glanced at Naomi, who nodded encouragingly. "I've accepted the position as Director of Community Safety for the Foundation." "Oh, that's wonderful!" Pastor Lila clapped her hands together. "We've all been praying about that." Rosa reached over and squeezed Caleb's arm. "The children will be so happy to have you staying." "Daddy Caleb," Theo's voice carried from the water's edge, where he stood pointing at a duck family gliding past. "Look." The adults fell silent, processing the title Theo had just bestowed so naturally. Naomi's eyes welled with tears, but her smile was radiant. Caleb's breath caught in his throat. "I'm coming, buddy," he called back, his voice thick with emotion. He rose and walked to the water's edge, kneeling beside Theo. "Those are mallards. See how the daddy duck has those green feathers on his head?" Tomas splashed over to join them, his curiosity piqued. "Can we feed them?" "I brought proper duck food," Rosa called, reaching into her bag. "No bread. Pastor Lila taught me it's not good for them." The boys cheered as Rosa brought over a container of cracked corn. Soon they were taking turns tossing small handfuls while Caleb explained how to avoid scaring the birds. Naomi watched from the blanket, her heart full. "I never thought we'd get here," she confided to Pastor Lila. "There were so many moments when everything seemed impossible." "Faith isn't about seeing the whole path," Pastor Lila replied, patting Naomi's hand. "It's about taking the next right step, even in the dark. You did that, dear. You chose truth and justice, even when it cost you." "We all did," Rosa added, her voice stronger than it had been in years. "And look what God has done with our little bits of courage." The afternoon mellowed into golden hour, painting the river in amber tones. The duck family had long since moved on, but the boys remained fascinated by the water, now hunting for interesting rocks with Caleb's guidance. "Time for a snack break," Rosa called, holding up cookies she'd baked that morning. The children came running, leaving wet footprints on the grass. As they ate, Theo nestled against Caleb's side, completely at ease. Tomas sat between his mother and Naomi, proudly showing off the smooth stones he'd collected. "You know what we need?" Caleb suggested as the cookies disappeared. "Some brave breaths before we head back in the water." "Yes." Theo jumped up, remembering the calming technique that had helped him through so many difficult moments. "Tomas, too." "Everyone can join," Caleb said, standing and offering his hand to Naomi. She took it without hesitation, her fingers intertwining with his as naturally as breathing. They walked to the water's edge as the sun began its descent, painting the sky in spectacular shades of pink and gold. The river reflected the colors like a mirror, creating a moment of such perfect beauty that Pastor Lila quietly pulled out her phone to capture it. The four of them stood facing the water, Naomi and Caleb, Theo and Tomas, their shadows stretching long behind them. The boys copied Caleb's stance, shoulders back, feet planted firmly. "Ready?" Caleb asked, his voice gentle but strong. "In through your nose, nice and slow." They breathed together, the simple act binding them as surely as any ceremony could. The river lapped softly at their feet, its rhythm matching their exhales. Theo's small hand found Caleb's free one, while Tomas held tight to Naomi. The sunlight caught the water in diamond sparkles, and for a moment they stood suspended in perfect peace. The journey that had brought them here, with all its pain and fear and triumph, felt complete, even as they stood at the beginning of something new. Rosa and Pastor Lila watched from the blanket, sharing knowing smiles as the little family unit drew strength from each other in the quiet moment. The breeze carried the scent of river water and late summer flowers, and somewhere in the distance, a church bell tolled the hour. Hope had indeed found a home here, in this gathering of hearts, who had chosen love over fear, truth over comfort, and faith over doubt. It lived in Theo's recovered voice, in Tomas's unashamed smile, in Rosa's straight shoulders, and in the way Naomi and Caleb's hands remained linked, anchoring each other in this new reality they'd built together. The river flowed on, constant and sure, while on its banks a family breathed in unison, their hearts beating to the rhythm of grace. What would you do if you were in their place? Comment your answer below, and let's see how you'd rewrite the ending. If you enjoyed the story of Caleb Hart, I handpicked the next story that you will enjoy. Please don't miss this one. Click here to watch it.